Morning, folks.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling the March Marine Fish Advisory Commission to order, March 18th. We'll start with introductions and announcements, review and approval of the March 18th business meeting agenda. I need a motion, or I need to hear opposition to the agenda.
We'll hear a motion to move to accept.
Thank you, Khalil. I believe that's cool. And it's been seconded. And if there's no opposition, it stands approved.
Who is the second, Mr. Chair?
Bill Doyle.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Review and approval of the February 18th draft business meeting minutes. Has anybody got corrections or changes they want made?
Billy Edmondson.
Hi, I just have two minor corrections. One is on page 3, paragraph 3. I'd just like to make it clear that I'm the co-PI, not the lead PI on that grant. And then on page 6, paragraph 3, it should say whelk spawn do not get dispersed through the water column.
Those corrections have been noted.
Thanks.
Shelley, I have a question. So who's the lead PI on that grant?
There are 3 co-PIs. David Bethany from the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation and Connor McManus from the Rhode Island Division of Marine Fisheries.
Thank you, Shelley, for the explanation. Any other changes to the February meeting? If not, I need a motion.
Seeing any further comments?
Khalil here, move to accept as corrected.
And a second?
Second, Tim Brady.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
If there's no opposition, it's so approved.
Not seeing any opposition, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to comments. Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, I'm thrilled with the participation of commission members who make constructive and thoughtful comments during our commission meetings. I think we've come a long way. I don't know, but I think I should comment now with all these virtual meetings that we're having. I believe it'd be to the benefit of commission members if we could be brought up to speed with technology in the way of, I guess, an iPad or a ThinkPad. So when we do receive documents, and they can be substantial at times, as opposed to writing on another piece of paper your questions and on what page and all, you can just jot down notes right on the ThinkPad or iPad. So I'd like to go on record, and maybe we could discuss this with under other business. Maybe other commission members will have comment on that. But that's been a concern of mine for a while, because to keep up with DMF staff and the documentation that you have to thoroughly vet and understand, I think it'd be easier if we could all write notes off to the side. And that's all I really have, but I want to thank everybody once again for their attendance. I'm very proud of this commission and the DMF staff. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Ron Amidon. Commissioner.
Good morning, Chairman Kane, and thank you for having me on today. I would like to, as I did in prior months, want to thank everybody for their participation. As you've noted, we have had an overwhelming amount of support with stakeholders attending these Zoom meetings, as well as great participation from the board members. I greatly appreciate the professional nature in which everybody approaches this. And I'm glad to see that you as the chairman are making sure that we retain this high level of participation and quality of discussion. And I'll limit it to that. I know you have a tremendous amount on your plate today, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Moving on to Dan, Director McKiernan.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Commission. A few things to catch you up on. Tonight is the public hearing webinar for Massachusetts on the striped bass plan information document. That's at 6 o'clock if you'd like to listen in. There have been other similar webinars, but they've been targeted to different states. Tonight is the one for the Commonwealth. In the last month since we've met, we've been very busy focusing on many issues. I just want to highlight some of them. In the area of protected species, we're preparing for the June trial concerning the Endangered Species Act in our state fisheries, and this includes depositions of me and of Bob Glenn, and it's very time consuming, as well as releasing documents to the plaintiff and his lawyers, also reviewing documents and devising legal strategies. We have 4 lawyers from the Attorney General's office assisting on this, as well as the 2 from the department and 1 from EEA. We're taking it very seriously. We are very busy doing some outreach to affected fishermen as a result of the actions that the commission approved back in January, and Bob Glenn is going to be talking about that later in the agenda. We worked very hard to prepare comments on not only the biological opinion, but the large whale take reduction plans proposed rule, and those were both due in February, or the second one was on March 1st. And that was a huge lift because each of those documents was about 500 pages long. And we are very actively meeting and working in order to submit an application to NOAA Fisheries for an incidental take permit as ordered by the court last April. And that's more difficult than you think, because what you have to do is you have to account for any reported takes of endangered species, as well as describing those fisheries in great detail. And that takes a lot. So that puts a big burden on our statistics program, on our permitting program, so that we can combine, permit statistics and catch reports with the seasonality of the fishery and anything else that we know about the conduct of those fisheries. And right now we're focusing on our pot trap fisheries, so lobster and whelk pots and sea bass pots, as well as the gillnet fishery. On shellfish, we're wrapping up the MSI strategic plan. If you recall, this was begun about 2 years ago, and I would say that this is on the 1 yard line. We have a strategic plan that is now being reviewed by the task force in its entirety. And this is a group that includes a lot of folks, mostly folks from outside DMF. However, I am the chairman of this task force, and we are working on a document kind of in full view of the public, which means every webinar that we have, every time we convene, it's open to the public, and we do have a lot of public peering in on this and commenting on it. And I really am happy to report that there were a lot of misgivings and a lot of mistrust about this process early on. And we seem to have resolved that, and mostly, I think, just related to the transparency that we brought forward with allowing the public to comment, during meetings, but also on any draft documents that we put out. One of the biggest takeaways or deliverables, I should say, for the strategic plan is going to be a formalization of the Shellfish Advisory Panel, and our recommendations for the legislature to codify a section of state law that basically convenes a panel kind of in the likeness of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, only a little different. They wouldn't have regulatory authority like you all do, but just as when we get together and we talk things out, a lot of things we do are not necessarily action items, but there's a lot of business that this commission conducts that is to the benefit of us and you and the public, and just the discussion aspects. And so we hope to do that, but we also are going to include stakeholders as well as agency not heads, but agency representatives. So we want to get the Department of Agriculture in those meetings. We want to get DEP in those meetings. We want to get CZM in those meetings, as well as the stakeholders. And I'm pretty optimistic about it. We have an SAP now, a Shellfish Advisory Panel. I created it 7 years ago to do just that. It's been pretty successful, and we're going to have our next meeting on the 31st. So that's going pretty well. Jeff Kennedy is going to talk later about the challenges that we're having on some of these ISSC mandates. about closing mooring areas or restricting harvest in mooring areas during the boating season, as well as dealing with the wastewater treatment plant buffer zones. And that's been a challenge for us, and it's taken us a lot of time on the shellfish team to figure this out. Jeff took over the shellfish program in the spring, and I became director about that time. And so this has been a first for us dealing with the ISSC since Mike Hickey retired. The Whelk Symposium is ongoing. It's been really interesting. It's a set of states all comparing notes on the manner of how we manage whelk fisheries among states. It's been a real eye-opener, and that report should be out soon. I do want to congratulate Steve Wilcox, who's just had a major paper published in Scientific Journal that captures his master's thesis, which is the age and growth of channeled whelk. On the council nomination front, I want to congratulate Mike Pierdenach for being nominated by Governor Baker to the New England Council obligatory seat. Mike applied 5 years in a row as a bridesmaid, never being nominated. And in the 6th year, his name was put as the first choice for the seat being vacated by John Quinn of New Bedford. And there's another seat open. It's an at-large seat in Maine. And the governor's letter identifies Jackie Odell from Gloucester as the preferred candidate for that seat, should we be able to get a Massachusetts person in that seat. As far as the agency goes, there's new permitting systems being developed for the recreational fisheries, and that's taken up a lot of time by some of our staff. That's a joint project with the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. There'll be a new vendor, so it'll have an all-new look next year with more bells and whistles and more capabilities. Also, Story Reed's been working on the development of a new commercial permitting system, and that's really complicated because anybody who knows our permits knows that we have a very complicated permitting system. It's tough to capture in software. And then the last thing I want to announce, it is with a bit of sadness that I announced Catherine Ford, Dr. Catherine Ford is departing DMF for a prominent position at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center at Woods Hole. She's taking on a very prestigious and demanding position of overseeing its survey branch, and she's been an incredible asset to DMF and she'll be missed. She leaves behind a strong team and a strong record of accomplishments. We collaborate with the Science Center a lot now, and I know our relationship with the Science Center will only be strengthened, but we are going to miss Catherine for sure. So those are my comments today. Ray, I'll take any questions.
Questions for the director?
I have a question.
I have one too.
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah,
that?
Dan.
Suki, you're recognized. Whoever that was, you're recognized.
Bill
it's-
raised his hand before me.
Oh, okay, well, I'll very quickly, Dan, this is Bill Amaru, and with Kathleen leaving, we were just beginning to set up a program for the Nauset Estuary Dredge Project where they were going to be doing some genetic studies for presence of blackback flounder. Will we be able to continue going forward? Will someone be taking Kathleen's place in that?
Yes, for sure. That is something that program is really going to carry on with. John Logan, one of her senior people who works out of the New Bedford office, has a keen interest in that, and as well as Mike Armstrong on the North Shore. We want to have a statewide approach to that, but I am not anticipating any drop off in our efforts in that regard, Bill.
Oh, good. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Suki?
Yeah, Dan, this is going back to the nomination for the council. I noticed in the governor's letter that the DMF consulted with members of the Massachusetts Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. Did I miss some kind of a poll or something that took place that we voted or nominated somebody for the commission? I wasn't aware of that.
Staff, we're dealing with that. I know a number of calls were made. If you weren't part of that group that was reached out to, I apologize for that, but I know a lot of the commission members were consulted, as well as some of the previous council members. I don't know if Melanie's on the call and wants to clarify our approach on that. I don't think so. Okay.
I am. No, I am. I was looking for the mute button. Sorry about that. Yeah, we don't, the process in the past has been to identify a few folks, usually balanced between recreational and commercial, and that includes some members of the commission, including our chairman. We haven't usually done the full commission membership, but certainly that's something we could talk about for the future.
Yeah, okay, I just thought where it was a commercial fisherman seat on the council, at least some commercial fishermen on the commission would had some input, but I guess it didn't happen, so I'm not sure what to say at this point.
That was the seat held by John Quinn. Right, Suki?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thought it was a commercial fishing seat. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess I don't know. I just a little distressed by Massachusetts political upper people not supporting. Doesn't seem to be supporting the fishing industry, especially the lobster industry. So just a little rant. That's all.
Thank you, Suki. Any response, Dan or Melanie, to Suki's concern?
Well, Massachusetts has, help me out, Melanie, 2 obligatory, and then there are at-large seats, and then we're eligible to apply for at-large seats. I guess one could look at the sort of who's filled those seats in the past and consider them, or one would be making assumptions about who's in them as being a commercial or a rec seat. The seat that that Mike Sissenwine sits in now and will be vacated next year when he terms out was occupied by Rip Cunningham in the past, 8 years ago. So from within Massachusetts, there hadn't been any recreational representation for 8 years, but there aren't any designated commercial versus rec seats on the council, just like there aren't any on our commission. But I can say that I think the balance of recreational commercial interests, it's certainly appropriate to have somebody on the council from Massachusetts that did what Rick Cunningham did for the recreational industry in the past, and I guess what Mike can do. But I don't want to speak for Mike, but he's got a pretty deep resume in terms of his work at ICAD and dealing with some of the highly migratory species. I think he'll do a good job and it'll be pretty balanced. Next year, the seat that will open up will be Mike Sissenwine's. And then the year after that, there'll be 2 seats opening up. One will be Libby Etries and I believe John Papalato's, although I'm not sure because John came on when he came on, he was filling a seat that was already filled, but someone had resigned. So that I'm not quite sure if John terms out in 2 years.
They term out at the same time, yeah, Libby and John.
So anyway, so those are the next appointments, and so I hope we get good candidates for those seats in the future.
Yeah, well, you could probably address the fact that they get so few applications, Dan. I know that's been a concern.
Well, we got more than was appeared on the letter, but we didn't feel that their resumes were deep enough to take on a 3, 6, or 9 year council seat.
All right. Any other questions for the director?
Williams?
Yeah, I just following up with Suki. Yeah, I kind of had the same feeling as Suki, but the seat, which I believe me, Mike would be a complete great asset to the council. But I was reading that yesterday, and that seat too, as I always felt was more of a Massachusetts commercial seat, and then the obligatory seat that's on the second one on there. I mean, Maine's not going to let that go, so we're definitely not going to get anyone on there. And next year with Mike Sisselwine seats coming up, we have no. I mean, I just don't want to see Massachusetts watered down the commercial sector with very little representation on there. So that was a concern of mine. Thanks.
Thank you, Lou. Any other hands, Jared?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the governors Governor Baker, Dan, and Ron for this appointment recommendation for the appointment. You know, I understand what my commercial brothers are saying here in the commission, but it's been a long time since there's been recreational for-hire representation in the Massachusetts seat, as well as equitable balance of such in the New England Fishery Management Council. So thank you, and the recreational for-hire community feels the same and happy to see it. So yeah, it's my understanding that these seats have never been a slot for commercial, recreational, or so on. They're just there. And once again, I just want to thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands, Jared?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we also like to ensure that all of the regional fishing ports are somewhat evenly represented in this fashion as well. So that is also a consideration taken into effect here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jared?
I'm not seeing any further comments or questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, moving on to law enforcement. Who's at the table? Lieutenant Bass or Pat?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's Lieutenant Matt Bass. I can be pretty brief. It's been kind of a cold and windy month. A little bit of effort. Still some expanding shellfish problems, kind of going up the south shore and out on the Cape. But primarily, our biggest effort has been in the bay. Removing gear. We've been working with DMF on board. We had the Craven down as well. And I think, and we were, fortunate enough to be out recently when that last entangled whale was spotted, and we were able to assist with that. But right now, I think I can pretty safely say we've got all the gear that that we know about is out of the bay like we've never seen it before. I think the last flight and last trip by Coastal Studies did not see any gear, so I think we're in a pretty good spot with that, and have to start expanding our efforts now to that newer closure that started on the 5th, moving up to New Hampshire. I think there's still some gear as expected to be out there, but with that, I think, like I said, most of that effort was removing some of that gear, and I think we've been pretty successful with that, with everybody's help. With that, I don't have anything else. If there's any questions.
Questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Director McKiernan?
Yeah, thanks, Jared and Ray. I just want to add a little bit to what Matt just said about an entanglement, just so the record is clear. The airplane spotted a whale in Cape Cod Bay, just east of Plymouth, and it had a large amount of 5/8" rope on it. And so we're talking in excess of 300 feet. So the diameter of that rope and the length of that rope pretty much negates the chances that it came from Massachusetts waters. And I'm told that it was very similar to the gear that was seen on the other entangled whale called cottontail that was seen south of Nantucket, and later succumbed to the entanglement. But this is not the gear that's typical of the inshore fishery that we are responsible for regulating. And it was fortunate that law enforcement was there and they were able to assist. Most of the gear was taken off the whale. And so I just want that to be on the record in case any commission members were wondering if we have an entanglement problem in the Commonwealth.
Well, thank you, Dan, for that, because that was going to be my question. I know when the center, whoever did the disentanglement, I believe it's the center or that team, I wish that would be so stated in the press, as opposed to just another whale is entangled with fishing gear. Well, we've been working hard along the coast to set up colors for different states, diameter of line, and they just leave it open to the public that, oh, it's fishing gear. Well, where? Was it Bay of Fundy fishing gear? And that's why I'm glad we're moving in this direction. But when it comes to the news, it's just the news, another right whale, endangered species, is entangled. So that was going to be my question, and thank you for answering that.
Thank you, Ray. And I'm just going to invite Bob Glenn to include that as part of his presentation. the fact that this particular line didn't have the kind of marks that we're going to be requiring in the future, so that we can rule out Massachusetts more definitively.
Thank you, Director.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, again, I apologize if I just glazed over that. I wasn't sure how, what other people knew, but yeah, it was more than evident to us when we pulled the gear up that it was, not that I'm any gear expert, but nothing that I've ever seen that's going to be fishing in inshore state waters. So very large stuff and not from around here. So I apologize if it's a good point that that's not all the information's put out there, but.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bass. Any other questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Not seeing any further questions.
Okay, we'll move along to action items. I just lost my screen here.
No, Jared's playing around with that. So thank you, Ray. I'll start with this. This is a challenge for us, and I have a solution that's a little bit, might be unexpected for the industry and for the commission, but it has to do with the issues we just talked about. So, as you know, this rule was set up by this commission 2 or 3 years ago as a conditional opening based on the amount of fish that has been taken under the so-called state waters set aside. And the area that's closed is closed between 42 and 4230 west of 70. And so what we do every year is we and this is challenging because it's a whole suite of species. I think I'm looking at that list as 10 species that for which there's a specific set aside for quote unquote states. But the truth is, in the Gulf of Maine, I think it's just Massachusetts taking any amount of or any significant amount of fish against these set-asides approved by the Council and the National Fisheries Service. So as we get close to those, or we don't get close to those, we tally that information over the winter as the information is made available. And that gives us an opportunity to make a decision, usually by February or March, should we open April or not. And the last 2 years, we have kept the area open. When we're close to 100%, what we do is we look at whether the federal, for lack of a better word, quotas are being achieved. And if there's ample room there, we're usually comfortable going a little bit over. And so, as you can see, in the case of haddock 2 years ago, we went 62% over in haddock, but there was a very substantial underutilization of haddock in the quota. So we were comfortable keeping it open. So here we face the question of should we keep this area open? Of the 3 years when we've been doing this, this is the one that's the easiest because the utilization of those quotas is the lowest it's been recently, and it's most likely related to COVID because of the lack of demand in the spring, summer months last year, plus some fishermen for reasons related to COVID and not wanting to, in some cases, crew members didn't want to be on close contact with others, or fishermen couldn't get crew to go. The effort was reduced. So here we are with some significant underages. So naturally, and I think we've sort of telegraphed this, that our recommendation is going to be let's open it up for the month of April. The challenge that I have is, again, I spoke earlier about the lawsuits that we're dealing with and the fact that we're going to court in June. And what's at stake is this is the state waters permitting of fixed gear, and that's what the judge has on her radar, is that any takes that are taken, or any right whales taken, is a problem for the jurisdiction that's authorizing the gear to be out there. And so in April, while it's not as bad as Cape Cod Bay, there are years that those whales are, meander up into outer Mass Bay, especially in April. And so I do have a concern about that. And so what I'm recommending is, and I honestly feel badly about this because, it's kind of a bait and switch. The gill netters that, have been following this have every expectation to think that they'd be able to go. I'm recommending not opening it for gill nets, but the other gears, the hook gears and the trawlers. And it's because of the potential for entanglement. Now, we got a lot of comments on this, but of course, I don't think much related to protected species, right whales, but there was a lot of comments about whether this was a good idea at all. And part of the opinion, I think, was based on the fact that I think some members of the public, because of the way the notice was posted, think that we're allowing fishing all the way up inside, all the way to the beach, when in fact that's not the case. And so you can see here from the slide, Jared's put together, the comments ranged from, we need more groundfish conservation, it's going to interfere with cod and with flounder spawning, and it's inequitable with the recreational fishery. So Jared, and the other two maps here are on the right, what is closed in May and what is closed in June. And that's they're slightly different, but those are historic closures. And some of it has to do with our identification of spawning aggregations of codfish, especially in May. So Jared, if you could go to the chart. Yeah, so just so the commission knows that if you vote this up, to those two gears, then the trawlers would only be allowed in that green zone on the map to the left, and the hook fleet would only be allowed in that green zone on the map to the right. It's not all of the waters all the way to the beach, and so why don't we discuss this in some detail now and see where the commission members are in terms of their comfort level with the opening of April, but doing it for just two of those gears.
Okay, then let's open it to discussion. Can I see some hands, please? Jared?
Not seeing any hands.
You're not seeing any hands.
Mike,
I'd
here.
like to. Okay.
You recognize, Mike?
Thank you, Ray. If I understand this properly, there's a Western Gulf of Maine quota for these species, and National Marine Fisheries Service provides that quota for the Western Gulf of Maine, and then you have this sub-quota that applies to this area. Now, National Marine Fisheries Service has not recommended the closure of this area, and it provides the ability to land these fish through the area. So then Mass DMS makes a decision through this process. What is the criteria to make the decision to open or close, or the basis for that? The fact that National Marine Fisheries Service is not recommending a closure and still permitting it, that's where I find the inconsistency. They're saying keep it open, and here we're to discuss whether you open or close it.
I'm going to ask Melanie for some assistance. So Mike, what you've said is there's a Western Gulf of Maine quota, and Massachusetts is given a piece of that, but actually it's a overall quota, and it's a set aside for states. So Melanie, why don't you join the discussion now?
Yep, I'm unmuted. So yeah, I think it might be good just to ground ourselves in ACL structure, right? Because there's distinct catch limits that govern the commercial, the recreational, and the state waters modes. And so those set up kind of distinct management decisions for how best to utilize that poundage and how to respond to underages or apply accountability measures for overages, ideally without impacting, the other mode. So in the federal commercial fishery, there's a pound for pound payback. In the recreational fishery, we use proactive and reactive changes to management measures. And that's kind of similar to what happens in state waters, in that the appropriate state jurisdiction is able to respond. And that's really what happened back in 2019 when Dan was giving the background of this closure. So for the first time, April was approved for closure to the commercial state waters groundfish fishery, but that's a unilateral state action. The state waters, because we use the term subcomponent, it's used very purposely by the feds because they don't allocate to the states. So, but there is a recognition that there is this for better or worse, what I'll term a catch limit, right? So there's a state water subcomponent. It is, it's specific to the stock, to the species, but there's no further area delineation by the state. So there's this Gulf of Maine cod state water subcomponent, which, as Dan noted, primarily is composed of Massachusetts state waters landings. And so in 2019, when the commission approved the closure of this area, it was really about how the state was going to toggle on and off access to fishing grounds in April, which is at the end of the fishing year, to manage that state water subcomponent. It's purely it's purely about quota management of that state water subcomponent. In the past, we didn't, and it's not a hard and fast quota, but we have been trying to be better partners with this in not letting that go. There were some large overages, Mike, that you'll recall, that came at the same time that there were some overages in other sectors that because of the way the AMs are set up, resulted in potential paybacks for there's no AM per se for state waters. The AM is the state's.
But Melanie, you might want to define AM for the commission.
Oh, I thought I mentioned it earlier. Accountability measures. The payback for the federal commercial sector and for the recreational sector, those are usually proactive or reactive changes to management measures.
Follow this stuff.
Yeah. So I'll pause there. That was dense.
I'm sorry, additional question. So, but National Marine Fisheries Service, New England Fishery Management Council, so on, has not rendered an opinion that this should not continue because of the status of the stock, whether it's cod or the other species.
That what should not continue, the fishing?
Allowing for fishing within this area, commercial, with these various means and methods would be prohibited.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, I'm sure the council and NIMS, I can't speak for them, but I don't think they usually comment on state waters management unless there's, they take a 10,000 foot level, right? We talk about it at the council when there's overages, but because of the jurisdiction of the state, the feds don't usually comment on what the state, the details of the state's measures. It's up to the state to decide how to appropriately manage the resource in its waters.
I guess that's why I'm a little confused, and maybe the rec sector versus commercial sectors managed differently. If you remember a few years ago when Dave Pierce was here, he was recommending that the recreational for hire continue to, or recreational allow one codfish. And the National Marine Fisheries Service said, no, they had 0 in federal waters, and that if it was implemented, the state would not be in compliance and it'd be more of a mess and it was worse. So it went to 0. And if I recall properly, one of the things behind that too is that the dead discards associated with the commercial fleet was such that their dead discards that exceeded their quota far exceeded the quota for the recreational sector. But I guess with that, that's where I find some confusion that recreationally it was going to be shut down and be held in non-compliance and we would have a mess, but it doesn't appear to be the same here. Or am I interpreting this?
No, I think there's a thread there for sure, Mike, a common thread, and that's in the that's in the Magnuson-Stevens where there's this comment, this line about states not undermining and supporting the federal FMPs, right? We're viewed as partners, but there is some linkage there in terms of, well, you're not out on your own doing whatever you want. We have, especially with these stocks that are between state and federal waters, right? That we shouldn't be undermining the federal plan. And I think that's what happened with the rec side, where we were on the wrong side of the fence there in the Fed's eyes, that as you know, effort rates at certain times and the calculations, now that we're at such low quotas for even just the one cod allowance, was viewed as too much mortality and would put us over overages. Whereas right now, this discussion is about an underutilization of the commercial state water subcomponents. So no, I don't think there would be, if this were the other way around, which was exactly what happened in 2018, 2019, where we were over, then yeah, we were getting some flack at the council. And we were, the subcomponent was being ratcheted down, and there was a lot of pressure on us to act, and we ultimately ended up doing that. But this, specifically this year, is about an underutilization.
Melanie, if I could, Mike, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole of the rec sector, but I think it's important to remember in history, we rescinded the one cod limit eventually because, we had some discomfort level because the federal government permits a lot of the charter boats, and that zero cod limit would apply to those federal charter boats regardless of where they fished. Right. So this fishery that we're talking about today is the vessels that do not have federal permits. So the federal government can't reach into their activities or meet them at the dock and say, hey, you're closed out. Am I right on that, Melanie?
Sorry, I muted myself. Correct. Right. They don't have any jurisdiction over GE vessels.
You did just one last question. Thank you for the history. So since when we went to zero, I believe for 2 or 3 years, we underutilized the recreational quota, and we asked for some relief, but because of the uncertainty with the status of the cod stock was indicated, because of that uncertainty, we need to maintain status quo. So as I look at this, there's been, the National Marine Fisheries Service is not saying to discontinue it. Mass DMF is looking now to open it or close it. The only thing I would just like clarification on with the opening, is there a concern for dead discards of, let's say, specifically to cod, and then that would be a problem ultimately with exceeding the entire Western Gulf of Maine quota as a result of the dead discards, because that seems to be an issue. And I just don't know whether the fleet that goes within here commercially has a problem with dead discards that exceeding the quota or not. So if you could address that question, and then that I'll be all set. Thank you.
Yeah. So, just to your first point about the recreational, and, we all know that the desire to get some kind of targeted cod access in the springtime, and unfortunately all that's been capable of happening is April and that expanded fall for hire season. And a lot of that has to do not necessarily with the uncertainty of MRIP data, but just the catch rates and the private mode that those are so high in May. And so until there's more quota, that's what's really been curtailing the feds from allowing that kind of access for the recreational fishery in months like May. On your question about the discards, so there are calculations the feds provide. I'm looking at their catch accounting tables, which are the official record, right, when it comes to whether there's been sub-ACL or total ACL overages, like annual catch limit overages, and they do calculate discards for the state waters fishery. If you go to those, there's a state detail that'll break down the catch by landings and discard, and it is primarily landings. So Gulf of Maine cod, I'd say for the last 2 years, and when I say last 2 years, full catch accounting is only available for 2019 and 18. It's on the order of about 0.3, 0.2 metric tons of discards. Now that's a application of the estimates that they apply to the state waters landings.
So then if I interpret this properly, between the feds and Mass DMF, we're comfortable with going in there, and there's not a level of uncertainty with going in there with an exceedance of the quota.
Yeah, every year we can't know for certain what's going to happen, but we do our best to look at what effort is like in the past and at times close to April, and we've done that. And that we can go back to the 18 analysis, which was a lot more detailed about what we'd expect. But given the severe underages this year for these, we are very comfortable that the subcomponent won't be triggered.
And Melanie, if I could just add a little bit of detail to why we feel that we have a 200-pound limit, commercial limit, and there's only about, I don't know, 10 active boats that we are aware of, and so we have 75,000 pounds of underage on Gulf of Maine cod. So that gives us some comfort level that April won't result in an overage.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, Melanie. I would like to thank you for your rationale
Morning, Ray. Thanks.
on this matter. You're very integrated, involved in the council process, and it's always good to hear from you at these meetings. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, we have a comment or question from Lou Williams.
William, you're recognized.
Yeah, can you hear me, Ray?
Yeah.
Okay, I kind of got messed up on my phone here. Yeah, I think really what we're talking about isn't really about the groundfish. There really isn't an issue there. I think the thing is that I'm going to speak on is the not letting the gill nets in there. And there's a history here with gill nets. We'll start with the 6-year closure down south of us that's been ongoing. And in those 6 years, once that closure goes into federal waters, the federal plan hasn't included gill nets. And I believe there's a reason for that. Over 20 years ago, there was a incident down off of New Jersey in Monkia with a whale. And then scientific, just like we're doing with the weak ropes for the lobstering and everything, a lot of work was put into it. And so for over 20 years, the gill net gear has been compliant. When I say that is in an average string of nets, every panel has 5 breakaways in it, 3 on the headline, 2 on the up and down lines. We use 22-pound Danforth anchors because they found that to be, if a whale did hit an end line, it would make it secure to be able to pot it right off. So on a string of nets, we have 59 breakaway points on an average 10 net string of nets. So I think that and also in April, whether they have something to do with the whales, we also have to put pingers on our nets for the harbor porpoises, which may help with any whale events, because in the last 20 years, we have no other gill net interactions. We have no end lines with green rope on them, which we have to put green markers on ours. Right now in that area, there's 6.5 months of closures. This will make it 7.5 months. I think the upcoming April, there might be 4 gill net is affected. I definitely just think that through science, this gear has been considered whale safe, and that's through the feds, because obviously, if they felt that the nets were a problem now for the right whales, they would have included them in that closure that's been ongoing for 6 years. And so I just, I feel that the fact that the gear's been scientifically rigged the way the feds want it to make it whale safe. There's been no whale interactions. I just feel this is just overreach in that fishery. So I would hope that people would take that into consideration while voting on this. And like I said, it has nothing to do with groundfish. We're well within the perimeters. And I feel that this is just, another boot on the neck of the gill netters by the Division of Marine Fisheries. I'm sorry, but that's how it felt for years. They want to see us gone. And this is just another way to kind of get us there. And in closing, I understand what's going on with this take permit for the judge. But I'll say, for me anyway, after we get through this process, if these closures do nothing to put us ahead of anyone else with this right whale issue, I would expect this commission to rescind those closures next year. Because if we're going to get nothing for it, why are we putting it in? So that's all I have to say, and just vote your conscience on this one. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lou. Those were thoughtful comments, and you may have informed the rest of the commission to the gear type and the fact that, you know, the feds are saying it's scientifically proven that it doesn't affect the whales. And very thoughtful comments. Thank you.
Dan?
Hands?
Yeah, Ray, could I ask Bob Glenn to speak to his knowledge
By all
of the
means, yes.
take reduction team and the issue of gill nets?
Yes. Look, Bob, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. So I first I would say what Lou just pointed out relative to the gillnet fishery and them being in complete compliance with every rule that National Marine Fisheries Service had developed in the past is accurate, and they certainly have, you know, taken the right whale conservation issue seriously and done what they've asked. The one area where I would differ from Lou is relative to their current state of thinking on the gillnet fishery and the aspect that if they were concerned, they would have addressed it already. National Marine Fisheries Service took a structured approach to the current right whale conservation issue, and they purposely tried to take one step at a time, and they identified what they viewed as the biggest gear threat to right whales, which was the lobster pot fishery, based simply because 90% of all the vertical lines deployed in the United States come from that fishery. And so in their first round of rulemaking, they focused on mitigation measures to protect right whales from lobster fishing gear. And that's been their focus for the last 4 or 5 years, as Lou accurately pointed out. That doesn't preclude them or from looking at the gillnet fishery. And in fact, that's currently in their plan. Within the proposed rule, they initiated a draft framework. And within that framework, they've identified a 10-year period whereby they're going to systematically approach every type of fixed gear. Gill nets will be included in that next round, and that next round of rulemaking is supposed to start later this year and into next year. And so NMFS is seriously looking at the gillnet issue. I anticipate that they will engage in that and very likely come down with additional regulations that pertain to the gillnet. We have had several takes of right whales and gillnets. They're not attributable specifically to the Massachusetts fishery, but in the last 10 years, we've had a handful of them whereby there are whales who have gillnet mesh panels wrapped around them, you know, over their flukes and over their rostrum and such. Those aren't attributable back to any specific fishery, but they're cause for concern, and NMFS will continue to probably aggressively pursue that in the near future. And then relative to the incidental take permit, as Dan indicated earlier, we're in the process of characterizing our gillnet fishing effort and providing that to NMFS for them to make a determination on how to or if to include the gillnet fishery in our incidental take permit application. And so there clearly would be watching this type of management activity very closely relative to that, and it could have future implications on our ability to obtain the permit. So I can take any questions but thank you.
Questions for Bob Glenn?
Lou Williams?
Lou, you're recognized.
Yeah, I'm just, again, if that's what the feds are going to do, okay, let's wait for him to do it. I mean, here we go again. We're ahead of everyone else. And, Bob doesn't have a crystal ball. He doesn't know what it's going to be. They may come out with the fact that the gear is fine. We don't know that. But to jump ahead and say, well, they might do something, so let's do something here, I just don't agree with it. Let's wait till see what the feds have to come up with. But like I said, up until this point, they obviously haven't seen the gillnet issue as a problem with the right whale. So they've had 6 years to put something in that big gigantic closure, and they haven't. So that's all I have to say about it. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lou. Any other hands, Jared?
Bill Ammer, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question still?
Well, yeah, no, I don't actually. The question was answered by Lou and then addressed by Bob, and that part of it does no longer it concerns me, but I now have the answer. The only other thing I was going to comment on was I don't like the idea of inequity between gear types. I never have. And I don't understand, frankly, why the opportunity is being passed up to give codfish a little bit more protection. I don't see it as an economically driven situation. But one of the comments in the statement that Dan put out, or the division put out, was that the COVID had caused financial hardship. But gee, the amount of money that's come into the industry benefited so many of us. And I have the feeling, since we just found out that $2 trillion more is coming into the public arena for subsidization and for financial help, I'm sure a portion of it will come our way. I don't get it. I don't have a lot of faith in what the quota estimations are and what we get for catches over the many years I fished. Some of the worst years I had were years that the quotas were extraordinarily high. Some of the best years I saw tremendous amounts of fish. We were not allowed to catch hardly anything. So the timing of the way they implement these quotas out of the National Marine Fisheries Service scientific stock assessments just doesn't jive in my mind. And if I could see these fish protected during a spawning period, and that area is famous for that, I just don't get why the division is not willing to bite the bullet and just say, let's give the fish a break. I think the fishermen are going to survive it. So that's my only comment. I made that comment in writing during the open period, and I'll just go along with that. But I think more than anything, I don't like the inequity between gear types.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Any other hands, Jared?
I'm not seeing any other comments.
No other comments? Well, this is an action item, so we'll need a motion on this.
I'm not seeing a motion.
I'll move to move the recommendation as presented in the memo by Director McKernan.
You need a second? Do we have a second, Jared?
Mike Pearnock, second.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the board. It's been vetted, discussed. All those in favor?
Mr. Chair, can we proceed to a roll call vote on this, as it is a formal action item for a regulatory action?
By all means, Jared. Roll call vote.
Bill Doyle.
Opposed.
Bill Amaru.
I vote no.
Suki Sawyer.
No.
Tim Brady.
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan.
I just want to say, I feel that the discussion and comments given were very enlightening, and I really appreciate it. And I thought about this a long time, but after clarifying the misunderstanding regarding the amount of state water fishing grounds that will be opened at any one time, understanding that now as to how the director explained it, I'm voting in favor of this motion.
Lou Williams,
No.
Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is a 4-4 tie. It goes to you.
Boy, this commission, I was kind of hoping they could resolve it. I try to run these meetings, and I hate being on one side or the other, but I'll vote no on this after hearing rationale. And I understand Bob Glenn's point of concern, but I also understand Lou Williams' point of concern. Why are we trying to get ahead of the feds on this? Because we usually mirror anything they say. So I'm going to vote no on this.
With that, the motion fails and April remains closed to commercial groundfish fishing in Massachusetts Bay between 42 and 4230.
Okay, Ray, if we could, maybe we could have a subcommittee kind of look at some of the larger issues here. This kind of tension about opening or not opening, I'd like to see if there's better ways to manage this. I'd also like to see if we could dovetail our rules a little smarter with the federal rules. I believe it, for instance, the second half of April is closed, just offshore. Maybe we should be trying to create some kind of uniform committee there. So, I'd like to continue this conversation with the commission at a future meeting.
By all means, Dan, can we get some volunteers from the commission for the subcommittee right now? So this is etched in stone.
Oh, obviously Lou should be on it.
Lou?
I see Lou's hand up as a volunteer.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, I guess I wasn't sure how this vote was going to go. If this vote goes to close it, I'll be quite honest with you. If it's either close it or let it stay open for the trawlers and some long lining, I'm fine with that. I don't want to see anybody lose opportunity in that area. And I guess I thought if this didn't pass, that it was going to open for everyone. I have a problem with. I do have a problem with closing it to the trawlers and especially the trawlers. This is a right whale thing, and I think that we might have made a little bit of a mistake here. I don't know if we can have a little more discussion on it.
Yeah, I agree, Lou, because I thought I was voting in favor of keeping this open to the trawl.
Yeah. I mean, I think after going through this vote, I don't know if we should kind of just take a look at this, because I'm in favor. I'm not in favor of closing it to every. If I have a choice between what Dan put up or closing it completely, I'll have to support that right now if that's how it's going to go. I mean, I don't want to see the trawlers and if there's some type of long line fishery that can go on in there. I'd rather see that happen, than a total closure for everyone, because it's a right whale issue. It's not a groundfish issue, and it's unfair to the trawl, especially the trawlers. It's unfair to them.
As a point of procedure, Mr. Chair, would you like a motion made again?
Yes, I would. And I'd like a roll call vote once again.
Okay, so this would be a motion on the director's proposed recommendation with the understanding that the default is a closure throughout April in the area between 42 and 4230 west of 7030.
Right. So this motion is on the screen right now. MFAC vote to open a conditional April commercial groundfish closure in 2021 to trawlers and actively tended hook gear. Gillnet fishing and longline sets overnight will remain prohibited. That is the motion. So can we have a roll call vote on that, please?
Do we have to move this motion before we go to roll call?
I'd move it again, yes.
Yes.
All right, this is Khalil. I move the motion as presented.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second it.
Okay, we'll move to roll call. Lou Williams,
Yeah, I'll vote yes on this.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
I'm going to remain negative.
Bill Doyle, Bill Doyle. Back to Bill Doyle. Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer,
I'll vote in favor of the Gilners. I'll say no.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Bill Doyle. Bill abstaining. The motion carries.
Thank you. Can we have the agenda back up, Jared, please?
Yeah, Lou Williams.
Can we take a 5-minute break before we move on to the next action item? Is everybody up for a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Jared, do you want to propose something on the screen that suggests we're on a 5-minute break?
We're recording. As a point of order, we were still on the discussion of the groundfish matter, and we're forming a subcommittee.
Thank you. That was going to be my first question. So Lou Williams has volunteered. Have I got any other volunteers for the subcommittee?
Hey, Ray? Ray?
Yes.
Yeah. On this break, I was just thinking, and I wanted to bring something up on this while we're still on this. I kind of had a knee-jerk reaction there. I felt we were voting on that first vote to go back to an opening for everybody. And my knee-jerk reaction was, of course, I don't want to see guys unnecessarily put out of that area. But actually, with my presentation, what I was hoping for is for the place to be open, obviously, to everybody. So I don't know if we can kind of revisit this and get a vote. And if it's voted down, that's fine. And we can go back to what we agreed upon. But I'd like to have a vote on that, if we could.
Jared?
That would require a recommendation of the director.
So Ray, this is Dan. I guess instead of doing a straight up motion, I guess I'd like the commission to sort of talk it out before then, because as Jared mentioned, that the way we operate is the commission approves, motions or recommendations of the director. And I'm just telling you with all honesty that I feel very vulnerable going into all that we're dealing with this spring into the summer. If we take that action, I'm not saying it can't happen in the future at some point, with new gear technologies or new breakaways, as Lou's described, with some blessings that some gear is really safe. But I'm trying to do what I can to minimize the impacts on the overall Massachusetts commercial fisheries. And I think that the smarter move on this is to, out of the presence of whales, especially mass-based, and not put the fixed gear there. So if 5 of the members of this commission think that that's a good idea, I'd like to hear that, but I'm just nervous. And this has been a very, very stressful initiative on the part of Bob Glenn and myself and Erin Burke and Anna Webb, Story Reed, as we try to explain to the legal team, about our fisheries management strategies and do our best to defend the commercial fisheries. I just don't think that that's going to help us. But I welcome 5 members to come forward and recommend that. I'd like to hear from them because I'm nervous.
Thank you, Dan. Let's open this up to discussion. So, Lou, you have the floor, and I certainly hope other members want to get in on the discussion. Lou?
Yeah, I'm just going back to what I said, Ray, about the where the feds don't have gill nets in their whale closures now, and the fact that the gear is scientifically proven to be very whale safe, And again, yeah, maybe the feds will do something in the future, and then if they do, because honestly, if the feds had it closed in the federal waters, I'd have to go along with it, So I just think we're kind of jumping the gun here, and I mean, it's stressful for Dan, but it's stressful for for gill netters. They have stresses too when they lose a month of fishing. So let's not forget that. But I just think it's something I'd like the commission just to take a look at and see what their feelings are. Because I think we all kind of, well, some of us, I don't know, I can only speak for myself, and Ray, you said the same thing. I thought we were voting on something different initially. So, I'll just open up to see what guys think, and maybe we can just take a straw poll, and if it's not going anywhere, it's not going anywhere, you know what I mean? So, okay, I'll see if anybody else wants to say anything about it.
Thank you, Lou. Jared, any hands?
Bill Ameren.
William, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm going to say this, and this is intended for the people who are working through the legal system to try and bring back a species of right whales. For them to expect the fishing industry, which is not the cause of the problem and has in many, many ways that I analyze it, not even contributed to the problem, to believe that continuation of pressure on our industry to bring back these whales is going to perform like it's supposed to, they're going to be disappointed. And what's going to happen down the line when whale populations continue to fall and fishing gear continues to be used to catch fish commercially? What's going to happen? Are we ever going to reach the point where they're going to acknowledge the fact that this is not the solution to the problem of the population of right whales in our waters? I mean, Dan is nervous. He ought to be nervous. Everybody ought to be nervous because they're asking for something that's not going to happen. We're not capable of making these animals reappear because we have restrictions on what we do with our fishing gear. It annoys me tremendously to think this way, not because I don't care about right whales, but because I believe that the efforts that are going into trying to bring them back are misguided, and the results are going to bear that out. So those are my comments. That has nothing to do with the motion. It has to do with the greater underlying force that's behind all of this stuff. Thank you. That's my comment.
Thank you, Bill. Thoughtful comments. Any other hands, Jared?
Dan?
You're recognized.
Thanks. I'd just like to respond to Bill, and I appreciate your comments, Bill. I just want to reinforce the theme of what DMF is doing right now. In the face of a lot of pressure from some conservation groups and some of the general public to demand for ropeless fishing, we are going with a dual strategy of timed, closures when whales are present and weak rope. But it's not one or the other; it's a combination of the two. And while the lobstermen in Cape Cod Bay insisted that they should be able to fish with weak rope, we just fell with sometimes up to 200 whales swimming around Cape Cod Bay, and now I would put forth some of those numbers up in Mass Bay. We just think it's more appropriate to do the combination of the time area closures, and then when the whales depart, because occasionally whales can return, singles or whatever, the weak rope makes a lot of sense. And so that's a strategy that we're putting forward to the courts because we don't want this decision made by a federal judge superimposing the court's will because of what they perceive to be entanglement risks, even though we can argue to a blue in the face that that 5/8 inch rope wasn't ours or that gillnet mesh panel on the snout of a whale wasn't ours. It's so difficult to prove that. So for the time being, because of the hot seat that we're on, I'm just pointing it out that this is a calculated strategy that the agency and the department, the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, and the Attorney General's office is pursuing with us in the short term. So I know right whales is a very it's questionable in terms of the ability to recover this species. There was 17 calves this year. I believe we've lost 2. So we have 15 new calves, and some of those animals have already arrived in state waters. So there's a lot of pressure on the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Dan. Any other hands, Jared?
Sawyer.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I'm aware as anybody is of what's at stake here, because of the lobster industry's part in all this. I agree with what Bill said. The industry is unfairly targeted through the brunt of all the saving of the right whales. I just nervous about, I feel bad for the few gillnet guys that are getting targeted by this, but because of all the lobster guys that had to, be out of there for no good reason. I don't think there's a good reason. I voted against the lobster closure back at the last month, if everybody remembers. I know what the state's up against. I know the situation we're in. It's awful. I don't see it changed because anything happens here today, but just want to go on record that I'm opposed to the fixed gear fishermen of this state doing all the sacrificing when it's not even the problem. And it's absolutely disgusting to me what takes place in this state, and the lack of political support we have is monumental. It's completely disgusting to me. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Suki. Well, I think Dan's made, I think the commission members and Dan have made strong points on this. I know Dan will be discussing CARES Act 2 on appropriations to the state of Massachusetts. And today, I believe you have that discussion. And now we've got this third CARES Act, which was just signed into law. So financially, I think these few fishermen could benefit from the CARES for revenues lost. But I also have the concern of Lou Williams, Suki Sawyer, and Bill Amaru that the fishing industry is being blamed for the decimation of the right whale population, the biomass. And I need a lot more evidence than what they've shown. But anyways, those are my comments. Jared, hands?
None.
So where do we want to go with this, gentlemen? Do you want a straw poll vote on this, Lou?
Lou?
Yeah, maybe we could do that. And I had one more comment after that. When we do that, I have one more comment, if that's okay, after we do that. Thanks.
So what are we voting on? Is somebody going to put something up on the board here?
Right, before you vote, I guess I'd like to hear from 5 commission members speaking independently that they think that this is an appropriate strategy, despite my concerns.
Well,
I think we've heard from Lou. We've heard from Lou. We've heard from Suki.
And we've heard from Bill Amaru. And my feelings, I understand where the director's coming from with the political pressure, and I understand his points about CARES Act. So we need more members to participate in this conversation. So please, somebody.
I have my hand up.
Khalil.
Thank you. It's kind of fuzzy as to what the discussion is going on right now. There's a lot of lot of stuff being talked about it, but the fact of the matter is, I feel that DMF is caught between a rock and a hard place regarding this, and I think they're trying to work to meet the demands of the Endangered Species Act, and this is really a multifaceted question. So I'm not really quite sure how you're going to craft the motion. I'm not sure what we would be voting on. I think that needs to be clarified a little bit more. I can appreciate what Commission Member Bill Amaru had to say. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And
Khalil, I think the motion, if a recommendation were to be made by the director to amend the previously approved motion, it would be to also include the use of gill net gear or other fixed gear such as long line set overnight within that closure area. So to not exclude those gears from the reopening.
I understand that, and I might have a question with that, because that wasn't the intent of the original motion, and I understand we'd be amending it, and I understand that there is, as Lou said, there are new techniques to ensure that if a whale got entangled in a gill net, that there'd be ability for that whale to be able to not get entangled in it as with previous gill nets. And so I'm not sure I'm comfortable, and I'm trying to be very sensitive to the gill netters, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable amending the original motion because that wasn't the intent of the motion. The intent of the motion was lifting the closure. And so I need to hear more and be convinced more before I would vote in favor of it.
Thank you, Khalil. Bill Doyle, any comments? All right, we'll move along to Shelley Edmondson. Shelley.
I agree with what Khalil said and feel the same way. I'd like to have a little more information, seeing that it's changed from the recommendation that was put forth, before I feel comfortable.
Thank you, Shelley. Tim Brady.
Mute myself. Yeah, I've been listening, and I understand where the director's coming from. I also understand where Lou is coming from, and Suki, but the way that I kind of look at it, even though I'm kind of representing recreational for-hire fishing, is that the motion that we voted on opened up a little bit of access for two gear types. It didn't open up for the third gear type, but I understand why that the DMF is reluctant to open it for that third gear type. So I support the motion as we voted on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Mike Pearnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do just need some clarification. I mean, I've heard the opinions of those around the table. Is Bill Amaru, does not want any of these motions, or he's proposing a revised motion? I just need to understand the criteria behind, or the basis behind his opinion before I render an opinion. I don't mean to point him out, but if I look at this, Bill has had some compelling facts that I'd like to expand it upon, and I'm not sure if I'm interpreting it properly, that we presently have to implement the mass DMF measure, or implement the mass DMF measure allowing all different gear types, or is there a third one that Bill is proposing?
Can I comment on that, Mr.
Bill,
Chairman?
you're recognized.
Thank you, Bill.
All right. I don't know if I can answer your questions, but I can tell you this. Are we talking about a groundfish measure, or are we talking about a right whale measure? This is the problem that this right whale situation is creating. I think I see a danger in having everything driven, at least is the way it's progressing in this conversation, where we start with talking about groundfish and possibly embarrassing one gear type over another because of a marine mammal issue. We need to separate the two, I believe, and act accordingly, according to the dictates of the laws that provide access to the fish, and at the same time require us to protect endangered species. And we're mixing the two. But to try to answer your question directly, I'm trying to be equitable to all gear types first. I'm trying to provide some protection for what I perceive as a cod stock that needs protection. And those two things outweigh my feelings about the dangers that are presented by gear in the water affecting right whales. So I voted to allow those codfish to have some protection because I don't believe any fishermen are going to be suffering financially because of it. And we have an opportunity to do something to protect a species that I think is in trouble up there, has been for a long time. There's an opportunity to do something outside of the normal process to give them some protection. And by the way, I noticed just before we went on break, there was a bulletin on the screen that showed cod protection necessary, or we're going to be missing, we're always missing the target for rebuilding schedule. It went up to 2024. Jared probably knows what I'm talking about. So right there in front of us on the screen was information about necessary protections for cod in the Gulf of Maine. That happens to be a very important spawning area, and I always think it's a good idea to protect fish that are spawning. So I got off the target of what your question was, but those are my feelings. I'm going to continue to try and prevent fishing going on in that area where it would normally be closed if we had met our quota, which I think is not. It's too high a quota for what's out there, and not concerned about the financial impact that it's going to have on the fishermen. I'm concerned about their well-being, but I think there'll be plenty of money. I don't think anyone's going to go out of business because they don't fish for the month of April on codfish in that area. But this marine mammal thing is driving us in the wrong direction. We're not able to do our responsibility to the other stocks that we manage.
Thank you, Bill. As I understand this motion, and correct me, Jared, this is not a conservation about codfish. This motion is about opening or closing that particular area. It really has. We have other management areas within the state for the propagation of codfish.
The regulation for the April groundfish closure in Mass Bay is designed as a safeguard against exceeding state water subcomponents. Layered on top of this for this year is the right whale issue, but in the director's recommendation, but the regulation itself is not a spawning cod regulation, although there may be spawning cod benefits in the later half of April when those aggregations do move into state waters. The measure itself is designed as a safeguard against exceeding state water subcomponents and then potentially exceeding overall ACLs and may trigger accountability measures in the federal fishery.
So the motion that was voted up was to allow the fishery to occur to two specific gear types, hook and line and otter trawl. And the amended motion would include the gill netters.
Well, there isn't an amended motion yet, Ray. I've asked for a conversation so that
Okay, I'm sorry.
I want to understand the sentiments of the commission as to whether or not I'm going to bring forward, another recommendation to change that. But I honestly, so right now I've got 4 members of this board who would not be in support of that. And 2 have gone clearly on the record as they would be supportive of that.
Can I render my opinion now?
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you. Between what's been said, especially with Melanie and Jared concerning the groundfish and what others have said, as much as I hate to see any access to the fishery denied to any rec or commercial or gear type, since it's the opinion of Mass DMF that you need this closure to protect the right whales, I have to go with the proposed measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So Ray, this has been a useful conversation. And so I don't intend to make a recommendation to ask or to make another recommendation other than these two. And I suggest we move on, and I will be happy to convene that subcommittee and have more substantive discussions about the proper ways to manage this fishery. When you listen to Bill Amaru's concerns about conservation, you listen to Lou's concerns about the need for access. I think there's more needs to be done, especially as we dovetail with the adjacent federal zone. So I'd ask the U.S. chair to move. Let's move on in the agenda. I think this has been really a helpful conversation, and I do regret that we're in the pickle that we're in, and I just hope that commission members who don't agree with my decision will be reasonable and mindful of what we're up against right now.
So how many, before we move on, how many members do you need on the subcommittee? Because Williams
Four.
Volunteered.
Four.
Are there any other volunteers for the subcommittee?
I'll volunteer.
That's Bill Amaru.
Yes.
That's two. We need two more members.
Mike Piernak, I'll volunteer.
Michael, thank you. One
Thank
more
you.
volunteer.
We can do it with three, right? We don't need four, but
Three's fine. There's
Yeah.
no need for four. That's a good subcommittee.
That's enough then, right, Jared? You've got three people for the subcommittee.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so let's, you can convene that subcommittee, on your calendar, Jared or Dan. So let's.
Yes, I'll work with Melanie and Dan to convene that subcommittee.
Yes, by all means, and I would appreciate Melanie's input in this subcommittee.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, Ray, we can move on to
Thank you. Final rules affecting recreational fishing limits and gears. Gulf of Maine haddock limits.
Jared.
Try to get
a.
He's up, Dan.
Yeah, let's try to get a motion on the two, on the haddock and the cod. I think they're so similar. Why don't we present both and see if we can get a single motion for the two species?
Okay. You've done a lot of talking. Do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
All right. So the first is Gulf of Maine haddock. This is to adopted April 1 through the end of February open fishing season with 15 fish bag limit and 17-inch minimum size. No change from the bag limit to the minimum size. This effectively adds 15 days at the start of the season in April to the fishery. It's consistent with the interim action approved by NOAA Fisheries for April 2021 and what the council approved at their recent meeting for May 2021 through April 2022. On cod, this would be adopting a April 1 through April 14th and September 15th through September 30th open season, one fish bag limit, 21-inch minimum size, no changes from the bag limit in the minimum size from what's present. What it would be adding is adding that September 15th to September 30th season for this upcoming year. And with that would be consistent with the federal rules for this upcoming fishing year, and it would be consistent with what the council recently approved. There's a little bit of uncertainty here regarding the for-hire bonus season. For 2020, a for-hire bonus season of September 8th through October 7th was implemented. We did that by permit condition because it was implemented mid-season, and that allowed us the ability to do that in a timely manner. That was done in response to COVID and the loss of charters during the spring season, where while it was approved by the council, We're uncertain if NOAA is going to approve that at this time. So what we're looking for here is effectively presumptive approval from the commission to adopt that September 8th through October 7th for hire bonus season, if approved by NOAA Fisheries, and not move it forward if not approved by NOAA Fisheries. So in aggregate, the motion or the recommendation of the director would be to adopt a recreational Gulf of Maine haddock season of April 1 through the end of February with a 15 fish bag limit and 17-inch minimum size, and a recreational Gulf of Maine cod season of April 1 through April 14th and September 15th through September 30th with a 1 fish bag limit and a 21-inch minimum size, and presumptive approval to adopt a for-hire bonus season of September 8th through October 7th, if approved by NOAA Fisheries in the coming weeks.
So question, Jared. On this NOAA issue, the council approved this recommendation. Do you know if it's at Garfo or if Garfo has approved it and moved it along to NOAA? Do we know anything about the timeline?
I'd have to defer to Melanie on that.
Melanie?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, no, I don't have any insight whether it's left the regional office or not. You know, I know Jared summarized this well. So the intent is we would have status quo rules with that for hire fall season, but that's kind of been the sticking point. So I know everyone's intent on the Fed side is to get these rules, regardless of what they are, out as soon as possible. I think last year we were about a month delayed, maybe it was August when they came out, in terms of when any rule changes are coming into play. So hopefully it'll be sooner than that, but we'll see.
Thank you very much, Melanie. So we've got the recommendation. This is an action item. Let me open it up to questions. Any
Mike
hands?
Pearnock.
Excuse me. Any hands, Jared?
Mike Pearnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We suffer from a tremendous biomass of haddock. The more haddock we catch, the more cod we catch. We don't come close to hitting our quota annually for haddock. And the past few years, we've been below with cod, but due to the uncertainty with cod, these measures remain status quo with the exception of the for hire. I don't know if there's any opportunity in the future that Mass DMF has once again led the way with their haddock charts that's been provided to the public. If that can demonstrate and show here in Massachusetts state waters how the avoidance of cod has occurred as a use of those charts, the for hire fleet data shows that we're able to avoid and minimize that cod bycatch per se. I only point that out that maybe there's something that could be considered in the future to present that data if it does support that, to possibly change our cod bag limit and ultimately haddock bag limits here in state waters. I don't know, Dan, if you can comment on that. Ultimately, I would approve these measures. I'm not confident that National Marine Fisheries Service will approve the for hire additional days. They pointed out during the vote that they have not made a decision, and it appears that for all the other measures up and down the coast, it's all status quo. And with status quo would not include this. So we would hope to see it, but I'm not confident that that'll be the case, and appreciate the fact that you have the language in here that if it does occur, it will be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, Mike, if I could respond, Jared did a nice job by reaching out to the Secretary of State's office in ANF and got kind of this presumptive approval that should NOAA go forward and make this change, that we wouldn't have to do new rulemaking to complement their rules. So it's really, our proposal is to just be complementary to what they're going to do. Otherwise, I think we'd have to go to, that would be kind of a bait and switch on our part, because we told the regulatory overseers that, for the good of the order, for the good of the industry, should NIMS do it, we don't want our state rulemaking to be so slow that we don't give our state waters or state fishermen the same opportunity.
Thank you, Dan.
Questions, more questions from commission members? Please raise your hand.
I'm not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair, if you want to move to a motion.
Yes, will somebody please move to a motion on this recommendation from DMF?
Yes, this is,
Tim Brady?
yes, Tim Brady. I would like to move the proposed motion to open the recreational fishing season for Gulf of Maine cod that occurs from April through 1st through the 14th and September 15th through September 30th.
Yeah, I think we're trying to do
Fine.
both cod and haddock.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Are you looking for a motion on cod and haddock?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I would like to move the motion as recommended.
Thank you, Tim. I need a second.
Bill Doyle?
Bill, thank you. Do you want a roll call on this, Jared?
I do, yes. We need a roll call vote. Bill Doyle? I didn't get that, Bill?
Yes.
Thank you. Tim Brady?
Tim Brady, yes.
Bill Amaru?
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan?
Yes.
Suki Sawyer?
Yes.
Lou Williams?
Yes.
Mike Peardnock?
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
The vote's unanimous. There's no opposition.
the next issue in this package is circle hook stand.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. This is an issue that Mike Armstrong and Nicola have been working on up front with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And just as recently as yesterday, there was a special meeting of 2 days ago, special meeting of the Striped Bass Management Board to resolve some of this confusion and inconsistencies, and in some ways reverse a vote that was taken last October that was very restrictive and was not going to allow circle hooks, or was going to mandate circle hooks on certain lures such as tube and worm and others. And so Mike led the way. A lot of this this came up as a result of Mike Peardnock's involvement, and the Stellwagen Bank Charter Boat Association came to our attention. I attended one of their annual meetings, and they brought this to our attention. They thought it was an inappropriate measure. And my recommendation to them was, well, there were only 2 states, Mass and Maine, who brought that to the board's attention, and they wound up reaching out to their counterparts in other states. When I mean counterparts, I mean other fishing groups, organized fishing groups, and did a pretty good job. And as a result, a lot of states kind of took notice of this, and we went back to the Striped Bass Board and asked for a special meeting on this, and we succeeded in getting that done. So the vote that was taken on Tuesday was significant, and it clarified the rules, and it brought them very close to what we propose or what we want. There is some nuance here. I don't know, Mike Armstrong, if you're on, do you want to fill in any gaps that I may have created with my representation of the issue?
Mike Armstrong, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dan, I think you covered it. It was the work group worked hard on this to get a definition and it's not perfect. And, you know, there are some holes. The one thing that isn't covered yet by anything is a rigged eel that it just will not fit into a definition that can be used. If that becomes important, and we hear that it's important, we can apply for an exemption for that. But I don't see a rigged eel ever being accepted under the rules that are now under ASMFC. But anyway, it wound up, to Dan's point, the entire board wound up at the place that we were at a few months ago with our definition. So it worked out well.
Michael, can I ad lib?
Sure.
I was on that call, and you know, Maryland's got some serious issues to address with striped bass in Chesapeake Bay. And quite often, Mike Luisi wants to make it sound like their issues are the entire East Coast issues. You know, when he tried changing the wording on this any marine or aquatic organism. And I wish Mike and his staff would address the striped bass issues in the Chesapeake Bay and be a bit more lenient with the other states, because the other states are working hard for the conservation. And it just irritates me to have to listen to him to try to sway the entire commission or the board. It's just very irritating, but enough said. Thank you, Mike, and you did a great presentation on Tuesday. Thank you.
So the motion, Ray, is the first 4 bullets to define bait as any marine or aquatic organism, live or dead, all parts thereof. Rescind the exemption for hire anglers. To broaden the exemption for the recreational hook rule to include any artificial lure with bait attached. That means the tube and worm. That could mean the eel skin, plugs, require. And then the last one is interesting, and this has to do with what happens if you catch a striped bass that's of legal size on a jayhawk. And in this case, our regulations are proposing to force anglers to return it to the water.
Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, law enforcement was very much in favor of that 4th one.
So there you have it. So I guess we're looking for a motion if there aren't any additional questions.
Questions from board members? If not, please move the motion.
Khalil?
This is Khalil. I have a comment.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended that meeting, the webinar the other day, found it very interesting. And I thought Michael Armstrong did a wonderful job. Sometimes less is more. And I believe that what we have in front of us is spelled out, and it doesn't leave any room for ambiguities. There were 1 or 2 amendments made to the original motion. And it seems that when people try to make things more specific, it opens up more avenues for misinterpretation. So I need to commend Mike Armstrong for the way he handled himself, and that the original motion that was presented is the one that was adopted. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Khalil.
Mike Beardnock?
Any hands, Jared?
Mike Beardnock?
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank all of those from Mass DMF that, including you, Ray, to help move this along and ultimately get to the point it is today. I thank you for the kind words. I may have led the way, but I had a lot of support from recreational and for-hire organizations from Maine to New Jersey that supported that measure. Ultimately, I wish that the rig deal was in there. It isn't. I understand why. We once again get into these logistics that make it difficult. So if that's still down there at that subcommittee level trying to address it, that's fine. But ultimately, I'm good with this. Once again, thank you all I think it's a great example how we can all work together to make things right. And this was, you made it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands, Jared?
I'm not seeing any other comments or questions on this. You'd like to move to a motion.
I would like to move to a motion. Please, somebody move the motion.
I'll
Khalil?
move the motion. I'll move the motion. Khalil Bogdan here to move the motion as defined in the proposed motion on the screen.
Thank you, Khalil. I need a second.
Bill Doyle.
Thank you, Bill. Roll call on this, Jared.
Yes. Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes.
Lou Williams,
Yes.
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Oh, Suki Sawyer, I'm sorry.
He already voted. He voted yes.
Okay. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So we're moving along to the blue crab trapping prohibition. Proposed motion or the recommendation. So
Jared?
shall we open this up?
Jared, I see a typo in the motion. It should be on the second line, prohibition would not apply to actively fished open or collapsible traps. So just for the record. Bob Gwen, do you want to give a few words on this one or it's up to you?
Yeah, sure, Dan, thanks. All right, so, whoops, excuse me one second, I'm just having a little computer issue here.
We can hear you, Bob.
I apologize, I was having a little technical difficulties. Yes, thanks, Dan. I'll speak to this. And so last year, you're all aware of this issue. It was brought to our attention that last summer, law enforcement had pulled several unauthorized traps in, I believe it was in the Wareham River or somewhere in the Wareham area, for folks who were targeting blue crabs. And in the process of following those traps, they found several diamondback terrapins. Diamondback terrapins are an estuarine turtle that are listed on the state's endangered species list. Obviously, protections are necessary to rebuild their populations throughout the waters of the Commonwealth. Their range is largely limited to the estuaries on the south side of the Cape Cod and to a lesser extent over in eastern Cape Cod Bay around Wellfleet and Barnstable. That represents kind of the northern extent of that species range. And so they do overlap in some areas in time and space with the recreational blue crab fishing. However, in Massachusetts, the vast majority of blue crab fishing occurs through using dip nets or active traps like a star trap, which is activated by the user, or hoop net. And we have a daily bag limit of 25 crabs that applies both to recreational and to commercial fishing. So essentially, we don't have any legal commercial targeting of our blue crab fishery. So to address this issue, we discussed several options. One of the options was the use of what's called a TED, a turtle excluder device. And these are used fairly extensively in the Chesapeake Bay area, where there's in Delaware Bay area, where there's extensive commercial and recreational potting for blue crabs. We don't have that activity. And while turtle excluder devices are successful at limiting a fair number of diamondback terrapins in traps, they're not 100% effective, and they don't really protect necessarily against juvenile diamondback terrapins. And so it's our concern that for us, if we were to go down that route, a number of things, we'd have to apply for a MESA permit from Mass Fish and Wildlife, and we'd have to implement a monitoring program on that activity. And frankly, we just don't feel that that's warranted given the really limited scale and the amount of participation to legally target blue crabs with a typical pot. You'd have to have a recreational lobster permit because that covers setting pots for lobsters and edible crabs. And we just have, there's only a very few individuals who participate in that because of the very small limit of 25 crabs. Most people just participate in using a dip net, which doesn't require a permit of any type. And so along those lines, it was our opinion, and what we proposed was to just a ban on using traps specifically to target blue crabs, whether that be a Chesapeake Bay style crab trap or a lobster trap, as we've seen more commonly around here. And so that's kind of the background of it. I guess with that, I'll turn it back to Dan.
Yeah, Bob, I would like to congratulate you on that public hearing. You brought a lot of clarity to the situation at hand. And we're not telling people they can't go fishing with dip nets, and we're not telling people that they can't go fishing with those three-sided traps that you put bait in, and when it hits the seabed, it opens, and when you pull on the line, it closes. What we're doing here are lobster pots and these Maryland crab traps. But it was very informative, and thank you, Bob. You did a great job.
My pleasure. Thanks.
I certainly hope other members listened in on that public hearing.
So Ray, the motion is up on the board to approve a recommendation to prohibit trapping for blue crabs. And this prohibition would not apply to actively fished open or collapsible traps, the so-called star traps,
Right,
as they're known.
Okay, gentlemen, we have a proposed motion or a recommendation for a proposed motion. Would somebody like to make the motion? Or is there further discussion needed?
Bill Doyle, I'll move the motion.
Thank you, Bill. I need a second.
Shelley Edmondson, second.
Thank you, Shelley. A roll call vote.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Leo Bogdan,
Yes.
Lou Williams,
Yes.
Mike Beardnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer,
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Sorry, yes. Tim Brady, yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second, Mr. Chair. I'll get the agenda back up.
Thank you, Jared.
We're now on to 5A. Would you like to take a couple-minute break here?
Yeah, I guess that was supposed to start at what time? I don't even have a clock in front of me.
We're running
4A.
40 minutes late right now.
We can go through some of these issues pretty quickly. On 4A, and Bob Glenn is going to speak to those. So Ray, if you want to take a couple of minute break, is that the plan?
Fine.
Okay.
5-minute break.
Sure.
action items, update on protected species issues.
That's right, Ray. And Bob Glenn is going to speak to these issues. He's been point for us on some of the protected species issues that's going on.
Thank you,
I'm going
Dan.
to hand you the screen.
Thanks, Jared.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. How are you today?
Good, and yourself?
I'm doing well. Quickly, I'll try to keep this pretty brief. I know we're in the interest of time. I have a few slides that I'll show here briefly. Okay, update on protected species issues going on. Earlier this month, the draft biological opinion comment period closed. DMF offered some comments to that, largely broken down into four main areas. The biggest comment that we made, or the most important one, was probably that we can concur and support NIM's conclusion that the lethal and non-lethal take of North Atlantic right whales associated with the proposed action that includes implementation of the framework when considered together with the species status and all other threats acting on it are not expected to cause an appreciable reduction in the likelihood of both survival and recovery of the species in the wild. And so that's the primary finding of the NIM's biological opinion relative to right whales for the whole list of fisheries that it included in that consultation, which includes the Northeast lobster fishery and the gillnet fishery, among others. And their conclusion is that they follow their framework, which is their 10-year proposed plan, that there will not be jeopardy to the species. And so we support and conclude that. We feel that that's a kind of a vital underpinning to our success moving forward to obtaining an incidental take permit. And so we supported that. Similarly, we concurred with a similar conclusion that they had for leatherback turtles, which was that the loss of 25 leatherback turtles annually in the Atlantic due to fisheries will not appreciably reduce the likelihood of survival for leatherbacks in the Atlantic, given the relatively large population size and measures taken to reduce the number of Atlantic leatherback sea turtles that are injured and or die in the Atlantic. And so essentially, NIMS in their biological opinion is indicating that the annual mortality of 25 leatherbacks is acceptable from all the fisheries combined. And it's our hope that when we apply for an incidental take permit, we will be allowed some portion of those takes, and that those takes will not contribute or stop the leatherback turtle from recovering. And so those are kind of the two primary comments that we made. In addition to that, we also raised concern with the 10-year framework that NIMS proposed. We didn't feel that a 10-year time frame was sufficient either really to evaluate the effectiveness of the management options putting in place. As currently proposed, NIMS plans to assess the effectiveness of the biological measures that they're putting in place next year, which DMF has already put in place this year. They plan to evaluate their effectiveness in 2023 for the first time. And so right whales are a long-lived species. Looking at 1 year's worth of data to see whether or not the options are effective, we didn't feel was logical or really took the life history of the species into account. And so we suggested to them considering a longer time for the framework, upwards of 20 years, and with the possibility of an overlaid trigger in the event that there was some type of mass mortality event, they could accelerate that. But we thought it was important for them to consider that. And then finally, one of the biggest issues we pointed out in the biological opinion was that in their projections for the rebuilding schedule for right whales, they use projection models to look at the likelihood of the species recovering based on current rates of mortality and calving, as well as what management measures are being implemented throughout the species range. In this case, National Marine Fisheries Service opted not to include recent management efforts taken on by Canada, which includes some fairly substantial dynamic area closures to portions, based on the presence of only one whale. They close a big block of ocean off. And so NIMS decided in their draft opinion not to include the effects of that. And by not including that, it puts substantially more burden on U.S. fisheries to solve.
Yeah, I can hear this.
To solve the
I
rebuilding
can go in the other
problem
room
for
if you
right
want.
whales, and because of that, we didn't feel that it was appropriate, and we suggested that they rerun projections looking forward that incorporate the effects of the newly enacted Canadian measures. Before I move on to the next topic, are there any questions about that?
I'm not seeing any questions, Bob.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jared. The other thing that we recently commented on was the proposed rule, and that's the proposed Atlantic large whale take reduction team measures that NIMS is putting into place in 2022. Most of the comments that we focused on were just administrative corrections to capture the specifics of the newly adopted mass regulations, the things that this commission voted in back in February. And NIMS had some portions of that captured in the proposed rule, but they didn't have all the details. So most of our comments were focused on that. We did provide one substantive comment about the proposed gear marking rules. We felt that NIMS proposed rules for gear marking did not adequately differentiate between gear fished in mass state waters and federal waters. And based on the fact that NIMS made it clear in the draft biological opinion and their incidental take statement that they issued only applies to fisheries under their jurisdiction. So essentially they're indicating that their incidental take statement and in the measures proposed in the rule only account for the activities of the fisheries in federal jurisdictions. And because of that, we thought it's really important for us to make sure that gear marking adequately is differentiated between state and federal waters. Especially because of these actions relative to the draft buyout, moving forward, it's going to be critical for every single right whale take to be attributed to the jurisdiction that authorized the activity. And we felt that the NIMS proposed rule didn't adequately capture this. And so to show you the issue, here's their proposed marking scheme. It's fairly difficult to understand and interpret. And each state has a different color and and then every state has a certain frequency of marks. And then what differentiates state and federal waters is the addition of a 6-inch green mark within the top 2 fathoms of the buoy. And to make this easier, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I asked NIMS to give us or provide us with a model as what would differentiate based on their rules between federal water and state waters. And this is what they sent back. And this is what I had feared. And so under their proposed rule, the only difference in a buoy line between state and federal waters would be that 6-inch green mark in the top 2 fathoms of the buoy line. The problem with that, one of the many problems with that, is that in the event of an entanglement, when we look at all the gear that's retrieved off of entanglements, very, very rarely in right whales do we get the surface system, so the buoy and the adjacent buoy line. So it's highly likely that in entanglement cases that green mark in the top 2 fathoms would be lost. And as a result, the only line remaining would be red marks, which would basically make it look like a Massachusetts authorized piece of buoy line or lobster gear, which obviously we don't want to happen. For any gear taken off a whale to be mistakenly attributed to our fishery, especially with us in the process of and future in the managing an incidental take permit. And so we really have pushed back on NIMS fairly hard, both in the comments, but also in several follow-up conversations with them to try to illuminate this issue with them and saying, we really need a gear marking scheme that clearly differentiates between state and federal waters. Jared Silver and myself have been working on some draft gear marking changes, and our primary objectives is to develop gear that differentiates between DMF authorized and NIMF authorized gear, so state versus federal waters. We also need to uniquely mark DMF authorized lobster gear so that it's distinguishable from all other lobster traps. And this is key because as part of the incidental take permit application, we need to differentiate ourselves, and we're in the process of trying to convince National Marine Fisheries Service that our fishery is unique and should be separated on the NIMS list of fisheries, which is a critical step in our permit application. And our final objective is to try to minimize the burden on the mass commercial fishing industry to comply with gear marking rules. And this is a challenge. And so what we've come up with just as an initial proposal would be, so what's on the left is what's currently in the NIBS rules, as I showed you before. And then on the right is what DMF is proposing for gear marking. So you can see to differentiate between state and federal gears, we're thinking about asking fishermen to put a green mark next to every red mark, so that in the event of only a portion or one mark shows up on a whale entanglement, that it's clear that it's a federally deployed mass fisherman, because in this case, it would have both a green and red mark on it together, not just the red mark. And then for state waters, we would increase the frequency and or the size of the marks required to differentiate it. And that's based on feedback that we received from NIMS relative to our request to be listed separately on the list of fisheries. And so all the other states' water fisheries will only have to mark with 3 marks. We need to mark with an increased frequency to obtain that status. And so we're, this is still in draft form at this point, but we're looking forward in the near future to try to finalize this and move the rulemaking process forward. Before I move on, any questions about this?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you recognize. Are you on mute, Bill?
Yes, I was. Excuse me. I would like to hold back my question because the context is not right. I'll wait until the completion.
Thank you.
Yep.
Khalil?
Thank you. I'm just curious. I'm not a lobsterman and don't know much about the lines and the markings. How does it, without going into too much detail or taking too much time, how does a lobsterman actually mark the lines?
Yep, there are a number of ways they can do it. Some fishermen will weave in a piece of colored twine. Some fishermen will use like a spray paint of some sort for the marks. I've seen other guys use colored heat shrink tube. There's a manner of methods. They all, require a fair amount of effort by the fishermen. So, we certainly recognize that this isn't ideal and it puts an increased burden for the fishermen to have to comply with these rules. But unfortunately, it's a necessary step.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bob, I would add there too that part of what we're trying to do with the state component is that if you are adding in weak rope, the red weak rope into your line, that would count as part of the marking. So where we are requiring sections of weak rope every 60 feet in the line, that if those sections are a foot long and red, that they would meet that gear marking requirement as well.
Yep. Thanks for bringing that up, Jared.
Jared, I have a question about that. That could be the red line or the candy cane, which is red and white.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions if you want to move on to the
Yep. Next. So an update on weak rope and contrivances. DMF has worked with commercial fishermen throughout the state and we've developed 8 different contrivances for fishermen to comply with the new regulations. Each of these options utilizes either weak rope or the South Shore sleeves that all break at 1,700 pounds. 10 samples of each of those 8 options were sent to Maine to the rope breaking machine a few weeks ago. The results, we got them back very, very quickly thanks to Maine DMR's work. And the results were all very good. All options tested had a mean and median breaking strength at or below 1,700 pounds. We immediately sent all that data along with description of those options to National Marine Fisheries Service for approval. Dan and I had some good conversations with a little arm twisting from some of our colleagues at National Marine Fisheries Service, and early indicators are that they're encouraged by what we sent, and it's likely that we should receive NMFS approval. We don't have official approval yet, but I think we're confident that in all the measures that we've developed, the contrivances that we developed, and as a result, it's our plan to roll these out as approved options at our upcoming DMF webinar for the fishing industry that's scheduled for next week. And so we have those options. I can show you some of those options here. These are some other ones. So these are all different options fishermen came up with. The one on the left is the South Shore sleeve reinforced with heat shrink tube. Fisherman of Plymouth came up with that option. It was tested and approved. The one in the middle is an eye splice of red rope, which breaks at 1,700 pounds with attached to standard commercial fishing rope with a loop that's tucked. And then on the right is a common butt splice of the red rope to traditional commercial fishing rope. And obviously the one in the background is an option we received from a bunch of different folks throughout the state, and that's just called a Canadian splice or a lazy man splice. And it's just we tested options of tucking the rope like this either 3 times or 4 times, and both options broke at or below 1,700 pounds. I should have put the table up here. What was also encouraging about that is they broke below 1,700 pounds, but not way below. They all were between 16 and slightly over 1,700 pounds, so within 10% of that mark. So it wasn't, we're not promoting any options that are just going to break at an unreasonable operational load to be effective for fishing. So it was encouraging that those options are worked out. Okay, any questions about the contrivances?
Bill, did you still want to hold off till the end?
Yes, I'm going to hold off to the end. Thank you.
Okay, and then final, in brief, our weak rope rollout. So with a grant from the ASMFC, along with an additional $200,000 directly from Governor Baker, DMF purchased 2,500 coils of weak rope and 7,000 South Shore sleeves. We have over 500 coils of rope in hand already, with an additional 500 showing up this week and the balance in the weeks coming. Our goal is to provide every mass pot trap fisherman with at least 2 coils of rope and up to 20 sleeves. We can actually probably provide more sleeves than that, depending on the uptake. DMF anticipates that this should provide enough material for every fisherman to rig all their gear with weak contrivances. So based on feedback from fishermen, using either a 3 to 4 foot section of the weak rope, 2 coils should be enough for every fisherman to rig out their buoy lines with the approved number of contrivances, or the input of sleeves.
Question, Bob?
Yes.
That might hold true for lobstermen running trawls, but how about the individual pot fishermen in Nantucket Sound with conch pots and black sea bass pots?
Yeah,
they might need more.
It's possible, and we can accommodate that. We should have enough to accommodate that, Ray. The other thing to consider, though, is their trap limits are only 200, and they fish in shallower water, so it might even out to some degree. But we certainly will attempt to provide additional if we can. We should have sufficient at this point, I think.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep. And so to get this rope in the hands of fishermen, we started hosting several rope distribution events throughout the state. The first round of those occurred this week with events in New Bedford, Sandwich, Gloucester, Situate, and Chatham. By the end of the business day tomorrow, we'll have distributed over 500 coils. We're planning round 2. And the next round, we're going to go back to Gloucester again because it's a big port, but then expand to Boston, Plymouth, New Bedford, Martha's Vineyard, and Provincetown. And we're in the process of setting up those dates right now. And then if necessary, we'll do a third round in the subsequent weeks, understanding that, we have a little in excess of 700 active lobstermen plus additional conch potters and fish potters. We'll continue to get it out. And we've sent several advisories out to folks through our advisory system, through emails, etc., and posted it on our website. And then there's word of mouth as well. And so the word is getting out. Not all fishermen regularly read their emails. So I anticipate that after this first round of distributions, when the word starts to get out, that we'll start to get more inquiries, and we'll continue to host these and make this rope available until we get every fisherman the rope. And with that, that's all I have, and I'll open it up to questions.
Lamoureux?
Thank you. Yes, Bob, you did a wonderful job. You have the pulse of the industry, and that's very important. But I have a question. I want, you use the term quite often. We all hear it, but I don't know if everybody understands what it is. And that's the word, a take. When I was on the council, I remember it was rather controversial what exactly the definition of a take was. I think the impression most people have, and I know the one that I once had, was a take meant a take. But in fact, it doesn't mean that, at least it didn't back in the day when I was on the council. Could you please define for the commission and anyone else listening what exactly the take of a marine mammal is?
Yeah, take in a context of commercial fishing would be any documented interaction with commercial fishing gear. It doesn't have to be lethal. It doesn't have to cause serious injury. It's any entanglement is considered a take. And in a broader context, it's any harassment, harm, interference with a protected species. In this case, is the legal definition of a take under the Endangered Species Act. So, for example, our current litigation is about a take of a right whale in documented Massachusetts fishing gear. It was a non-lethal take. The whale was successfully disentangled, and there was no serious injury designation given on that. But nonetheless, it's an unauthorized take under the Endangered Species Act.
Right. Which, of course, most takes are a non-lethal interaction with any number of things, but in the context of commercial fishing. So this is something that I'm not sure very many people understand when they read the newspaper or they look at a journal or a report or something on the internet, which everybody does these days who's interested in this topic. And I just wanted to bring it forward because any number of takes of right whales occur in many other types of marine mammals without there being any injury involved. And we had one situation in Chatham a number of years ago where a gill netter was setting out his lines. It was in the middle of the summer on a bluebird day, and not a right whale, but a humpback whale came through his gear. He had an observer aboard. Rather than continuing setting, he pulled back the buoy line, which at that point had flipped over one of the whale's flukes. He pulled it free of the fluke and moved a little bit and continued to set his gear. He was accused of a take and went through a tremendous amount of hassles and court suits and filings of numerous kinds. And all he had done was act judiciously to try to protect the whale. And he was punished severely for it with fines and having to write apology letters, which were published in the newspapers. It was ridiculous. But I bring this out because I want people to understand in more depth what exactly we're talking about with a lot of the jargon that passes for information about what we do as fishermen and how we approach the challenges. Oftentimes we're handicapped by the very rules and regulations that are put in place to try to protect the animals. But otherwise, I think everything you just presented was excellent. I know that commercial fishermen in this area, a lot of them have spoken to me. Dan has gone out of his way to help explain things to them directly through phone calls, and it's working out quite well. And I don't know how it could have been done better. And I'm very proud of your work and of the division's work as well.
So,
Thank you.
thank you, Bill. I have a question, Bob. So you're applying for this permit to allow us one take annually. So what happens if there's 2 or 3 takes? Not mortal, not fatal, just interaction.
All right, so first, let me just clarify, as we're applying for an incidental take permit. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can take one per year or a set number per year. What it does is it authorizes any take under the Endangered Species Act. And in this case, we would be covered for, a non-lethal take. For a lethal take, that kind of switches over to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which looks at potential biological removals. For the whole country, the PBR currently is 0.8 rather. But the goal is over the next 10 years, National Marine Fisheries plans to reduce that number from 0.8 down to 0.1. So to put that in a context of rate, that means you could kill one right whale every 10 years for the entire seaboard. For Massachusetts, trying to get a separate, its own distinct fishery, we would have some rate of lethal take less than 0.1. So essentially, we can't kill any right whales, or it's not just kill, it's also seriously injure. We can't have a serious injury or mortality designation. What would happen to our permit is the permits are issued and they're issued for a 3-year period. After the 3 years, National Marine Fisheries reviews that. They also can revoke them in the interim if there's severe violations. And so we'll continue, much like the rest of the entire fishery or fisheries throughout the Northwest Atlantic, we're all going to be under tremendous scrutiny to both monitor and account for any takes and or serious injuries or mortalities.
Questions for Bob?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I was at those photographs were of Gloucester yesterday, and it was very good turnout. And I was kind of worried because, again, kudos to Bob and Dan and the staff at DMF. I knew Jared's Justin's training under fire, and he was very professional. There was nobody getting lathered up because I'd say there was at least 75 guys there, and they all had to wait to get in line. A lot of people hadn't signed up through the state or through MLA, so they had to wait till the end to, if there's any rope left over. But he answered everybody's questions. He did a great job, I thought, and I was very pleased how it came out down there. Going backwards, I hope all this effort that Massachusetts is doing right now is recognized by the National Marine Fisheries Service, because they put a 10-year plan in place already, it seems like, with no input from anything that's going to happen, this year, next year, or any other year going forward to save the right whales. And there's no accountability for any of these sacrifices that the industry is making right now going forward to prove that the right whale, the industry is not causing the demise of the right whales. So, and the state so far has done a very good job of trying to get that message out there. And just to talk earlier today about the 5/8 rope that was found on that whale in Cape Cod Bay, and it's not attributed to the inshore lobster fisheries, that message never gets out to the public. They just see these pictures with whales that people don't even tie their boats up with that size rope. and they just comes back and gets blamed on the lobster industry. And it's very disheartening, but Bob and Glenn and Dan are doing a great job of, getting this information out to the public, and we need the public to see this more because we're inundated with this crowd that says, we need ropeless fishing. These guys are killing right whales and they have to stop, and we're not doing it. And it's very disheartening, but the state's doing a great job, and specifically Justin yesterday, very well. I thought it went well, and going forward, they just need a few more towns. I think Gloucester, being the only one on the North Shore starting off, was too much of an ask for Gloucester. I think they need to spread it out to some of the smaller communities on the North Shore towards Boston more, and try to reach out to those guys a little bit better. But thanks again to you guys. It was a good job.
Thank you, Suki. Thank you for the compliments to DMF. My suggestion to DMF is to get some news time on PBS. That's the one news channel I believe in. I think you'll get clarity and truthful reporting. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, if I just may just comment quickly, I would be remiss if I didn't point out and thank Mass Lobstermen's Association, and specifically Beth Cassoni. Beth Cassoni was really instrumental in helping us set up these events and getting the word and directing fishermen who are interested in this, getting it to to communicate with DMF so we could make sure that we had rope on hand. So, MLA has been very supportive, and Beth has been really helpful in this process. So I thank her. And I also would, like to thank my staff, both Justin Wilson and Aaron Burke, and as well as Julia Kaplan and Jared and Story and all the folks who have been and helped coordinate this. It's been quite a big effort, and it was very much appreciated. So thank you.
Yes, once again, we know the effort put forth by MLA, DMF, the harvesters themselves, and the public is not aware of it.
Mr. Chair, we have another question from Mike Peardnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do if, unfortunately, a right whale washes ashore, let's say on the beaches of Truro, and there's no entanglement of any gear type, who accounts for that death? Is it going towards our take percentage in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so for any type of a serious injury or mortality for a whale that washes up dead without any gear on it, basically we're all suffering from that. Although Massachusetts often gets a lot of additional scrutiny and blame put on it because of the oceanography of the Northwest Atlantic. Cape Cod sticks out and is a catching point for a lot of flotsam and jetsam throughout the entire Atlantic Ocean. And so there's a lot of whales that, got entangled and died 50 miles off our coast, end up washing up onto our coast. And so it's a constant challenge for Dan, myself, and Aaron Burke to fight off the misnomer that's a Massachusetts entanglement or Massachusetts take, because it clearly isn't. It just the whale just happened to show up here. Or in the case of the entanglement this week in Cape Cod Bay, that whale swam into Massachusetts with gear from someplace else on it. That we can't prevent that. Our conservation plan doesn't prevent that. So we have to be vigilant in making sure that record is clear and established, and that so it's a constant challenge, Mike.
Yeah, that doesn't seem fair, but a lot of this is scratching my head. But if it's entangled in a Gulf of St. Lawrence gear, and you're able to identify that, and it dies in our waters, is that going to then once again hit our quota, our percentage? Excuse me.
Yeah, no, that would go towards a Canadian take. There have been cases of a couple of right whales that were entangled south of Nantucket and went off of Long Island, I believe, where the gear was positively identified as Canadian snow crab gear. And so those takes were were attributed to Canadian takes, not US takes.
Thank you.
Questions?
Not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair. I'll bring the agenda back up.
Yes, please. Thank you very much for your presentation, Bob. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
Raymond, we're about to go to the New England Council update. Could I recommend, just as a decision now, to move Mark Russo's somewhat lengthy presentation on the Mass Ocean Acidification Commission report to a future meeting?
So moved, Dan.
Okay.
New England Council update. I presume Melanie's still on the call.
I am, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'll keep it really brief. I know we're running late. So just in terms of keeping you guys up to date on what's happened at the council and what's going forward in the next couple of weeks, the council met last January 26th to the 28th and took final actions on groundfish framework 61, specifically the redfish exemption. So that wrapped that up. Also framework 33 for scallops, which was the 2021 fishing year specifications, and that really moves the fishery out, starts to move the fishery out to Georges Bank with some additional measures to further mitigate against flatfish bycatch. There were small mesh specifications set for 2021 through 2023. And otherwise, we discussed earlier, and you took action on recreational groundfish measures, so I won't go into that in any detail. The council meets next in April 13th to 15th, and most of that meeting will involve updates on several council priorities towards final action later in the council year. These include herring rebuilding and spawning protection on Georges Bank, fishery access to northern edge habitat closures, and the council will also need to decide at the April meeting how to pursue a couple different limited access amendments, the Amendment 5 for skate fishery and the discussion on limited access for hire fisheries. Otherwise, the first day of that meeting will largely be taken up by climate change discussions and ecosystem reports. So going forward, other than the usual development of annual specifications, I'll just highlight a few unique priorities for groundfish. The next couple of weeks and months will involve some review or development of metrics for the Amendment 23 monitoring system review. There's also follow-up in terms of consideration of management measures relative to the cod stock structure working group. This is more specific to actions that might be taken regardless of the assessment outcomes in 2023. Also, ABC control rule discussions will be something that the council will need to tackle. For scallops, there's RSAs coming up for 2021, or excuse me, that has been announced for 2021. So anyone interested, there is a notice that went out, and you can see the surveys and the bycatch reduction and turtle projects that were funded. We're dealing still with limited access discussions. There was a limited access leasing petition for secretarial action, and the council has been asked to review it for merit and provide feedback to GARFO. That probably won't happen in April, probably more likely at the June meeting. Herring, I mentioned the spawning and rebuilding on March 26th, so next Friday, the SSC will review and provide its guidance on rebuilding measures. Let's see what else. Otherwise, I just note that in the next couple of weeks, there's some public meetings, really some informational sessions by the Science Center seeking some feedback from fishermen and other interested parties on this executive order, or actually really a series of, well, it's one executive order, but there's a series of fisheries related items in it. But this one is specific to climate resilience, providing for climate resilience in fisheries. And so there's a March 23rd and an April 1st public informational meeting. Anyone can share input on the other item, which is that 30 by 30, protecting 30% of our land and water by 2030. But this really is specific to the climate resilience portion. And I can share that link later. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, that's pretty much it. And I'm always available for folks to chat with later if they have any other questions or comments or requests for detail.
Thank you very much, Melanie. So can we move along? As Melanie has suggested, you can get in touch with her after the meeting if you have pertinent questions as to council updates and actions.
I'm not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Updates on shellfish growing area, reclassification of 3 bays. Who's got this?
Yeah, Jeff Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me share my screen. Jared? Keep getting the same pop-up. Host has disabled participant screen sharing.
You should be able to share now.
Thank you. So you saw this slide the last meeting. There was a June 2018 joint dye study of the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant. It's to try to determine what the impacts are of treatment plant on adjacent shellfish growing areas. FDA provided an executive summary in January of 2020. Prior to that, they'd had a couple of PowerPoints that they had with us. And then just the NSSP requires mandatory closed safety zones around a point source such as a wastewater treatment plant. They recommend 1,000 to 1 dilution line unless you can justify it in another manner. Typically, we look at that. It needs to be based on time of travel. So how long it takes in the pipe going out and then to reaching an adjacent active shellfish area. How long do you have? In the past, we've always used 4 hours. We need 4 hours to get notification and to notify the local shellfish constable, who could then respond and try to kick harvesters off the flats. That could change, but typically it's around 4 hours. It could result, this dye study will likely result in a slight expansion in the prohibited closed safety zone based on the 1,001 dilution and time of travel. It also, the NSSP also requires a conditional area adjacent to that closed safety zone. And they recommend 100,000 to 1 dilution line. So that's a much larger area. It's based on, in this case, it was based on dye. We're hoping to use actual fecal coliform concentrations to try to delineate the borderline of the conditional area to an straight approved area. So when you have a conditional area, it requires additional documentation. You have to have a management plan and an MOU with the treatment plant and those neighboring communities, as well as it will require additional sampling by DMF, water quality sampling. This is the classification back in June of 2018. You can see that most of Kingston Bay and Duxbury Bay is straight approved. And then inside of Plymouth Beach, it's prohibited, except there were a couple of, they called it the triangle area. That was a rec area just inside the Plymouth Beach. January 2021, this is what it looks like now. The only changes really are the triangle area has been closed because of its proximity to that purple triangle. That's the location of the outfall. And this is what the recommended reclassification schema would look like that the FDA has proposed. So they're dividing it up basically into 2 areas. The conditionally approved area A and conditionally approved area B. based on different conditions of the treatment plant. They also recommended an expansion, a slight expansion of the prohibited zone, closed safety zone. We think we can work with that and just to target those areas that are within that 1,000-to-1. So it won't be quite as large as what they've drawn. So the proposed condition is both areas closed with the discharge of raw sewage of any volume. The conditionally approved area A, the southern part, Kingston Bay, essentially, would close if there's a settling basin issue or upset and or a loss of disinfection. Conditionally approved area B, Duxbury Bay, would close if there was a settling upset and a loss of disinfection. The conditionally approved area B, Duxbury Bay, would remain open if only a settling issue occurred or if there was only a loss of disinfection. So the key steps we've been taking is we've received the data from FDA and we're analyzing it, modeling it in-house. And we're using the study parameters, the flow rates of the wastewater treatment plant at the time of the dye study. And we're providing new information we've obtained from the wastewater treatment plant. We've had several meetings with the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant on operations, and we've received answers to a questionnaire, which gives us more information on how they're currently operating the facility. The facility has been, a new contractor has taken over back in September of 2020. So they have new operational parameters. So we're learning from them exactly what they've changed and what is different from this June 2018 dye study. We're also collecting samples for fecal coliform for the influent, pre-disinfection and effluent to try to understand if the plant is a high performing plant and exactly what their efficiency is, how many log reduction you can expect in fecal coliform from the influent to the pre-disinfection to the effluent. Same with MSC, we're trying to demonstrate plant performance. Right now we're evaluating, going back over the historic DMRs, discharge monitoring reports, and reviewing how the plant has performed in the past and what upsets have, what events have triggered upsets at the plant. We're also looking at plant upgrades. We're reviewing the dredge study, the dredging that Army Corps conducted a year ago, as well as incorporating the plant efficiency studies. What we don't, of course, it's hanging out there, and I felt like I needed to put that bullet down the bottom in there is Plymouth is currently conducting a feasibility study for an inland groundwater discharge. Right now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant, but it is on the west side of Route 3. And so the outfall has to go all the way through town and out to the water. So they have a lot of space up there, and they've created these sand pits where they're studying whether or not they can use that as the discharge and just basically eliminate the outfall, which would really help us because then as soon as you've taken away all that effluent and those contributions to the 3-bay system, then you can you've eliminated that point source, and it's allow you to probably revert back to an approved area classification. No decisions have been made yet, but staff is reviewing the data even today. So we're in daily meetings, and I've reached out to the town to ask if they'd participate in work groups and exactly who might be willing to participate in any work group.
Hey, Jeff, if I could, the reason we're bringing this to the commission just for edification is this is a big deal. About 25% of the state's oysters are produced in this 3-town embayment. There is we think, an imminently opened market in the European Union, and under the State Department agreement, only those oysters from so-called approved areas are going to be allowed to be shipped. So any growers who wind up in a conditional area would not be able to participate in the European Union for sale, unless, of course, those oysters were either placed in a different, approved area prior to going. But it's all very complicated. So the take-home point here is that we are still studying the wastewater treatment plant operations. We're also asking FDA for more time to study this, to study their data, and it's still a work in progress, right?
Certainly. And we're trying to set up a meeting with the FDA just to go over some technical aspects of their data analysis. I'm not familiar with it, but how to interpolate their GIS data. So from the dye study. So it's.
Jeff, would there be an opportunity for the local folks, including some of the growers, to participate in some kind of a meeting with either ISSC or FDA? You see that as an opportunity?
Yeah, certainly not in this technical discussion. Matter of fact, I'm not even participating in this in that meeting, but certainly we could have another meeting. And I've heard from the executive director of ISSC. He's more than willing to participate and explain the process and exactly where we're at in that process.
Okay. I guess you can take any questions, right?
Certainly.
I have a question, Jeff. So reading through what material I was supplied with, has Plymouth got an issue with their wastewater treatment plant? And if so, can it be addressed?
When you say, does Plymouth have an issue, can you explain that?
With their discharge rates, whether it's clean enough to be discharged,
It's
everything functional at their wastewater treatment plant. I think that's my question.
Yes, they're a good performing plant, no question. Their average fecal coliform discharge that they monitor and report to DEP and EPA is just over 1 fecal coliform per 100 mils. Their limit is 14, and their no single sample is supposed to be greater than 28. Those occurrences are very rare, but certainly the design or the specifications in the NSSP, in the guide, are very conservative, because you are talking about sewerage and approved area criteria for clean areas. It's a geometric mean of 14, and that they've changed the standards, but swimming standards used to be 200. So you can swim in waters that you can't shellfish in. So those standards are very conservative. And so when you start running dilution calculations, trying to get to that outside that 100,000 to 1 potential impact zone, that 14 is a very stringent standard. So even with a plant that normally it works, operates just fine, these guidelines, these controls are based on the assumption of a failure. If there's an upset at the plant, if there's mechanical upset or breakdown at the plant, if there's routine maintenance that takes some of the equipment offline, how does that affect the treatment efficacy?
Thank you, Jeff. Questions for Jeff?
Bill Doyle?
Bill, you're
Yes.
recognized.
Thank you. Jeff, thank you for all your efforts and good work. The way the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant now is managed presents no risk to the public. Is that correct?
Under normal operations and their discharge monitoring reports that they provide DEP and FDA, or DEP and EPA, that they stay within their permit. They're well operating.
Okay. I know that we're in a bit of a card game with FDA. FDA has sent these letters to other areas along the East Coast, correct?
Oh, yes, they do evaluations of every state's program annually.
And has FDA ever enforced any of these changes?
They have different ways of enforcing. Yes, they have. Have they ever taken the nuclear option and embargoed an entire state? Not that I know of.
Right. That's why I say we're in a bit of a card game where we present no imminent public risk. I strongly suggest that we not be the first one to accept their their recommendation based on extreme circumstances of a failure.
I wouldn't say we would be the first. They've gone into other states, done dye studies, made recommendations, and those states have complied or reached some accommodations with them.
Well, I would encourage us to keep working on coming up with an accommodation that works, because we're talking about diluting what has become the finest oyster brand there is. And it's a big part of Massachusetts' reputation. And to prevent this top area from entering the European market, it just doesn't speak well of us or what we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Peardnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jeff. Can you go back to the chart that identifies, or can you identify where the outfall pipe is to the sewage treatment?
I don't like that one as much. I like this one better.
Where is the outfall pipe? I think I know where it is, right?
It's whoop. Apologies. Right, the purple triangle right by CCB 42.1.
Right where I thought it was. So this is not a discharge as a result of peak loads. This is an ongoing discharge from the sewage plant.
Right. What the proposed conditional area would be based on upsets, plant upsets. It could be.
Well, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not clear. There's two ways in which it goes. The sewage treatment plant treats the sewage and has an ongoing discharge via that pipe to the harbor.
That's correct.
Or the sewage treatment plant treats sewage. It can't keep up with the peak load, and then during rainfall events, it discharges to that area. Is it one or the other?
Well, it's not Plymouth is not a combined system. There are some communities that have they combine their stormwater with their sewage. Plymouth is not a combined system. That said, flows always at treatment plants always seem to go up after rainfall. So there is some communication there, but it's not the flows are moderate after rainfalls. They don't skyrocket as you might see it at other more urban areas. For example, there are CSOs in Boston, in Lynn and Saugus. There are CSOs in New Bedford, but not every wastewater treatment plant handles both wastewater and stormwater. Plymouth only handles wastewater.
Right. Well, that's positive to hear. I mean, it's a new sewage treatment plant, relatively new. It's privately operated. There's a new operator that has operated. For those of you in Plymouth, there's been some major overhaul to the distribution lines because there was issues with that. So that's been repaired. I'm glad to see that you're considering including fecal coliform with the analysis with the dye study. Because it's just simple logic. You do a dye study, you release the dye from the outfall, and it's only subject to dilution. But with the fecal coliform, that's going to be subject to biological degradation, chemical degradation, and it's going to degrade with distance, where that doesn't occur with the dilution. So it'll give you a better representation of the point source, distribution, and extent of the impacts from that. I just find it hard to believe with the tidal cycle we have here that it will be of issue. I'm not sure about the model and the model they use, and I'm not sure whether the model assesses a discharge where there's a 2-foot tidal cycle, where we have more of an 8 to 12-foot tidal cycle. So that's just some questions in my mind that we can talk about later, but I'm happy to see that you're considering that fecal coliform count while you do the study. I think that'll be important. Thank you.
Thank you. I should say, Bill is right. We have good water quality in the 3-bay system. We have been monitoring it for since 1988. DMF has, and the water quality is very, very good, even inside of Plymouth Beach. It's just that closure is based on upset conditions and our inability to react that quickly if there was an upset. So.
No, I agree. And for those that have lived in that area for years, there's been a considerable change since the construction of that new plant. I don't know off the top of my head whether it's 10 years or 15 years since that plant was constructed, but the water quality has significantly changed for the better in the harbor. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing, please, Bill Doyle? That might bear clarification. Each day, that wastewater treatment plant, every day of the year, discharges plus or minus 1 million gallons of treated, what used to be called, I believe, stage 4 water, which is, I guess, technically drinking water quality. 1 million gallons each day. So it's something that they're good at. It's been going on for a long time. It's never affected public safety, and that's should be the primary concern here, whether or not we're jeopardizing public safety. Thank you.
Questions for Jeff?
Not seeing any further hands raised.
Thank you, Jeff, for the great presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we'll be hearing from you down the road, I presume.
Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move along to other business. We've item number 5. That's going to be, that report will occur at a future meeting. And we're moving on to other business. Commission member comments. Shall we start with Khalil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm all set.
Suki?
Yeah, I'm all set. They're not talking today, Ray.
Bill Doyle?
Yes, I just have one question I should have asked before. Jeff, by accepting the FDA data, have we triggered a...
Bill, I didn't hear the end of that.
Yeah, Bill, can you repeat your question?
Yes, my question, I guess, would go to either Dan or to Jeff. I'm not sure if Jeff is still here. By accepting the data from the wastewater treatment FDA, have we triggered a...
I think yes. You're asking whether or not there's a time frame on that, and I spoke with FDA branch director yesterday, and they still are expecting a response from DMF by March 22nd. We have since then we're asking for additional information on how they calculated their dilution zones, and that discussion hasn't occurred yet. So I don't know that Monday will be a hard and fast deadline at all. In fact, it just is the start of a discussion, I believe. So, but they want to know what our take is on it, what our interpretation of their recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Shelley Edmondson.
No comment, but thank you.
Bill Amaru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank Dan McKiernan, Director, again for directly contacting some concerned fishermen up in Provincetown about questions that they had. I don't think there are too many directors of departments in state government that would take the time to directly phone a constituent who's got a problem and relieve them of their anxieties like Dan did. It's really much appreciated.
Thank you, Bill. Tim Brady.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Lou Williams. Lou.
There we go. Yeah, all set, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Michael Piernock.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I know that Dan's on this. There's been some from the for-hire fleet that have reached out, curious of when the next CARES Act funding will hit the streets, and if we could hear something about that in the future, that'd be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I'll close out with my comment. I appreciate, I'm very thankful for the commission we have. People are engaged. They make intelligent conversation. And I very much, and I think DMF staff and Commissioner Ron Amidon appreciate all that. You're engaged, you're thoughtful, and that really matters. So I'm going to go to the public now. Have we got anybody in the public, Jared?
If you're a member of the, we do. If you're a member of the public who would like to make a comment at this time, you can use the raise hand function, and I will identify the chairman that you'd like to be recognized. Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any comments from the public. If you'd like to move to make a motion to adjourn.
Would somebody like to make the motion to adjourn?
I'll make it, Ray Suki. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Suki. Seconded by?
I'll second it by Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley. No opposition to adjournment.
Not seeing any opposition.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.